It was the day when one of the most beautiful weddings took place in London society. A few minutes after the ceremony, the priest, with a joyful smile, declared the couple married. The Admiral's eldest son and naval officer, Edward Morton, and the only daughter of Lord Dyer, who was actively involved in the life of Parliament, Elizabeth Dyer. At the same time, everyone celebrated and envied the union of beautiful young people. Everyone knew that before the meeting, the young people were completely alienated. But now the young people looked at each other lovingly, and all the guests present spoke about it. But everyone in society also knew that the young people were brought together by one young lady. She was also known in London as the best matchmaker, and her name was Miss Laura Pendleton. After some time, the lovely ladies with joyful smiles discussed a truly magical wedding. They saw that the young lovers looked like angels. Laura, in turn, was happy about such a union because she had known the bride since she was a little girl. Also, looking at her companion, she saw a beautiful lady. At that very moment, the young lady said with a smile that the young couple would soon go on their honeymoon. She said with a smile that she heard that the young people would go to Italy and that it was the most luxurious place to travel. But at that very moment, the young lady also drooped. Laura, smiling, invited her companion to continue the conversation they had started earlier. Miss Hyde, in turn, was a little puzzled. Laura's companion said with a smile that the young man was going to propose to her. The lady, in turn, was a little puzzled and did not know whether she should get married. Miss Hyde was the second daughter of the family and Rosemary's younger sister, as well as Laura's friend from her boarding school days. She loved cricket and horse riding, but she also knew nothing but reading. Something very stunning had happened to her earlier. She received a letter from a man she considered a friend with the intention of proposing to her. She was shocked and said that the young man was going to visit their house and officially propose to her. She understood everything perfectly well, but she couldn't even imagine something like this. She didn't expect that all this time the young man loved her because she considered him just a friend. The young man was the second son of a local noble family. He was a businessman with a long tradition who had become rich through trade. He had his own lands and a mansion, as well as an excellent character, tall stature, and attractive features. Laura, looking at her companion, understood that the young man was truly an outstanding groom. At that very moment, the lady asked her companion if she refused the offer. Would he be very upset? Laura was shocked and asked the girl if she was really going to refuse the marriage. Hyde knew perfectly well that she was behaving stupidly. After all, her parents, as soon as they saw the letter, immediately began to fuss, trying to set a wedding date. She understood perfectly well that she would not be able to find another such groom, but still she did not see him as her companion. Laura reassured her companion and said that life as an unmarried woman is very difficult, both in human and financial terms. But she told the young lady that the most important thing was her own feelings. She asked the girl to put other worries aside and listen to her heart. Laura asked the girl if she wanted to spend the rest of her life with him, but her companion could not answer the question. Laura was a little puzzled, as she knew what the future held for an unmarried girl. At that very moment, a young man came up to them and greeted them with a smile, and also asked what they were talking about. They were shocked, but he asked with a smile if he had interrupted their conversation. William looked intently at the young girls, and at that moment he saw the anxious expressions on their faces. He asked if the young lady was okay. She was taken aback and said that she was a little worried. Then he suggested that she go home. She sighed and said that if she rested a little, she would feel better. William was glad to hear this and immediately offered them his help. Laura understood perfectly well that her companion was uncomfortable around the young man. William was taken aback and asked the young lady with a smile how she was doing. A moment later, they began to have a pleasant conversation as if nothing had happened. William looked at the young lady and said with a smile that he had one small request for her. The miss was surprised, as she did not expect anything like this, but with a smile she asked what he needed. He, smiling, said that he has a relative who will soon become his son-in-law. The miss thought for a moment as she remembered a young man who was quite famous. Ian Whitefield was a very popular man, but at the same time a hidden one. William said with a smile that he had recently received a letter from his school friend, and he said that he was planning to visit London soon. And besides, he received another letter from his friend's sister, asking him to help her brother. After all, she wanted him to introduce brother to a worthy lady. William looked closely at the young lady and with a smile asked her to help him in this matter. Meanwhile, the young man read the letter with bewilderment and wondered why his friend and sister were trying so hard to drag him into London society. Sometime later, the young lady slowly walked home, thinking about the young man all the way. She knew that he was the heir to a large estate, a skilled businessman who had increased his fortune in less than a few years. She was surprised and did not expect to be asked to become his friend. Laura told her friend that she was not sure whether she could arrange a match for the young man. William understood her concern, but he was also puzzled because his daughter-in-law was putting pressure on him. He also understood that she did not want to introduce her dear friend without reason, and so easily to a man who did not really intend to marry. So the young man asked the young lady to accept Ian as her new friend. She agreed to his proposal, but she didn't know if everything would be okay for her. But she saw that her friend cared about the young man, which meant he really was a good person. Laura decided to throw all her thoughts away. After all, right now she had more important things to do. Her case concerned her friend, and she knew she needed to talk to her urgently. After some time, the young lady returned to the mansion and the servants asked how the wedding she attended went. Laura said with a smile that everything went well, but also asked how her grandmother was feeling. A moment later, the young lady took it from the maid's nose and decided to take it to her grandmother. She knocked quietly on the door and asked her grandmother if she was asleep. Her grandmother responded, and she said with a smile that she would now enter the room. The young lady slowly stepped inside to her grandmother. The lady looked at the knight with a smile and asked how the wedding went. She wanted to know everything without exception. After some time, Madame happily said that she was very sorry that she did not see the groom cry in person. Laura said with a smile that she remembered the day they first met. And yet the young man suffered for a long time, not knowing what to do with his feelings. The lady looked at her granddaughter with warmth and thanked her for the wonderful couple she had brought together. The madam told her granddaughter with a smile that she had arranged many marriages and that she was a truly talented matchmaker. The young lady, in turn, was embarrassed by the praise, and her grandmother watched her with warmth. But after a moment, she looked at her granddaughter with a serious look and said that she had one question. Madame wanted to hear an honest answer from her own flesh and blood. The madam stated that she had never met a girl like her granddaughter with such inner and outer beauty. So she asked her granddaughter why she used everything she had only for others. She wanted to know why her granddaughter didn't find love of her own. So she assumed it was all because of the man who had once abandoned her. She was worried, but the young lady told her grandmother that it was very late and she should rest. Madame did not utter another word, as she understood that this was a very painful subject for her granddaughter. After some time, the young lady was also quietly praying, sitting in her room. She asked God for the well-being of her grandmother and for peace for the man who left her many years ago. Sometime later, the young lady was in a hurry to get to a meeting because she had received a letter. She was informed that her friend had come to see his beloved. There he proposed to her, but alas, he received a bitter refusal. After this incident, the young lady locked herself in her room. Rosemary wrote to her precious friend that Jane needed her. At the same time, the young lady, without wasting a minute, arrived at her friend's house. The lady greeted the young lady with a smile and thanked her for arriving so quickly. Rosemary said with a smile that she would like to talk to her sisters. But at that very moment, they were all taken aback, as they heard a scream coming from the upper floor. The madam screamed furiously that the young matchmaker had ruined her daughter's wedding. She was furious because she knew they shouldn't have been dealing with a girl with no background. Rosemary was taken aback and apologized to her friend, as she understood that now was not the best time to meet. Laura assured everyone with a smile that she understood their grief and feelings, madam, but she still wanted to go to her friend and talk to her. Rosemary immediately apologized to the young lady. Laura accepted her apology with a smile. To say that she was not at all offended would be a lie. But at the age of 25, she decided to abandon the idea of marriage. She was prepared for people to perceive her as an unsold spinster. This was the other side of London's best matchmaker. Laura quietly knocked on the door and asked her friend to open the door. The young lady walked out slowly and looked her best. Laura looked at her friend with a smile and said that she heard that she had not eaten anything lately, and that's why she decided to come. Laura looked at the young lady and said with a gentle smile that no matter what the pain in her heart was, she should not ruin her health. She also said that she had brought some treats and she should try them. Laura saw that the young lady did not react to her words in any way. Then she told her friend that if she felt guilty in front of the young man, then she shouldn't worry. Then the young icy one broke her silence and asked her friend if she could imagine her future. Flora sighed heavily and said that she would not have any inheritance, since she was not recognized as a member of the family anyway. Jane sighed and said bitterly that she wouldn't have anything either. After all, since her father died, their house has been gradually falling into disrepair, and if they lose the house, they will have to move to the village. She understood that she had behaved stupidly, and now she did not understand why she had made such a choice. She screamed with tears in her eyes that she had no other way because she didn't even have a normal education. She screamed that she was already old and useless, and at the same time, she did not know what she could do. Laura froze for a moment as she heard the unpleasant number again. For a woman in their time, 25 is a frightening age, because the last train to marriage has almost left. And for an unmarried girl who had no chance of inheriting a fortune, the worst thing is poverty. To wake up one morning and realize that everything that surrounded you before has disappeared without a trace. A girl could be thrown into the abyss of poverty and loneliness overnight. And nothing could surpass this fear. Laura knew this better than anyone because she had been through something similar herself. But she still encouraged the young lady and said tenderly that when she was her age, she couldn't do anything. Laura told her friend with a smile that she could be anything she wanted. She could have become a fortune teller or a street vendor when she became prime minister. The young lady was taken aback by this. At the same time, she asked if she was really joking now. Then Laura said with a smile that the young lady could become a typist. Laura smiled and said that when she was a dash girl, she was going to become a typist, and even bought herself a typewriter. She hadn't used it for a long time, as she had been busy with something else, but she wanted to borrow it. Laura looked at her friend tenderly and asked how she liked the idea. Jane, in turn, was a little surprised, but at the same time happy with such support. She gratefully accepted Laura's offer. A month later, the young man happily greeted everyone around him. But moments later, he asked his comrade how it felt to be back. His companion was a little puzzled, as he saw that London had become even more noisy and bustling than before. Ian couldn't understand how his friend had managed to drag him into such a fuss. William said with a smile that London high society was the flower of English society. He told his friend with a smile that since he was visiting London, he might as well relax and enjoy the company. William told his friend with a smile that rumors of his arrival had spread throughout London, and he had even begun to receive invitations. Earlier, one interesting one specifically informed everyone that Ian Whitefield would soon arrive in London. Ian Visdigaya stated that he was not going to participate in various gatherings because it was an extra hassle. He didn't want to go anywhere before his friend, but he still insisted on it. William told his friend that he absolutely had to be at this event, and at the same time he said that he had found himself an excellent ally. Ian looked at his friend in bewilderment, as he did not understand what he was talking about. Meanwhile, the young lady was slowly getting ready for the ball, but this event caused her some anxiety. She knew that the man who always refused all social meetings and parties would suddenly appear at this event. Rumors spread quickly, and many people began to confirm their involvement. So she began to think that he was actually someone important. A moment later, she and her maid began to discuss the young man. The maid looked at her mistress with a sly smile. The young lady looked at her in bewilderment, as she did not understand what she had in mind. The maid asked her mistress if she would like to do something unusual with her hair. She said with a smile that the young gentleman was amazing and very rich, and it might be that he would fall in love with the lady at first sight. Laura dismissed such talk with a smile, as she knew he would want to marry any young and beautiful lady. Laura smiled and asked her maid to do her hair as usual. A moment later, she thanked her maid for helping her get ready, and looked at the lady with a smile and declared that she was as beautiful as she had been many years ago. Laura was very touched by her words, so with a gentle smile, she thanked her for this. Sometime later, the young lady attended the event and noticed that there were a lot of people there. She wondered if the young gentleman had arrived. But a moment later, she turned around as she heard a familiar man's voice greeting her. The young man noted with a smile that this year's social gathering had been overcrowded from the very beginning. Smiling, he said that he came with his companion, but she had disappeared somewhere, and now he could not find her. Laura looked closely at the young man, as she saw that his wound had healed, but he had lost a little weight. At that very moment, she asked where Mr. Dalton was now. William smiled and said that his friend was a little late as he had met up with some university friends, but he would arrive soon. William ran up to his friend in a hurry and asked why he had arrived so late to the event. Ian sighed and said that he had things to do, which was why he was late. At that very moment, William announced with a smile that his friend's companion would be a lady. The young man was puzzled. Ian asked his friend if he was actually making himself a matchmaker, but his friend assured him that the lady was one of the kindest in London and that she would suit him. He also assured her that she was very smart. Ian asked if he was confusing upbringing with intelligence. William was surprised by such a question, and then his friend said that the world was full of well-bred ladies, but he had never met truly smart and witty ones. William was a little puzzled by his friend's words and therefore asked if he was being too strict with the ladies. Ian Visdohaya told his friend that he had talked to different women and had not found a single one with whom he could have a normal conversation. William told his friend that they would leave the wit and intelligence for later, because today he simply wanted to introduce his friend to his girlfriend. A moment later, they approached the young lady. William looked at his friend with a smile and asked how long she had been waiting for them. At that very moment, he introduced his friend and son-in-law all in one with a smile. Ian, in turn, looked intently at the young lady. She also looked at him with a smile. She had previously told her friend that if his son-in-law was not interested in love, it would be difficult for her to find a suitable match for him. William told the young lady that his son-in-law was not interested in social life, but he had serious views on love. She was surprised and did not understand why such a serious man was not actively looking for his partner. At the same time, William stated that his son-in-law simply believed in fate. Of all the people she had ever met, he was the most handsome gentleman. She understood that many ladies would dream of a fateful love with him. Without wasting a moment, the young lady greeted her companion with a smile, as she had heard a lot about him. Laura said with a smile that she heard that he was a good uncle to his nephews and a good brother to his sister. He sighed heavily and said that he was not such a good uncle, and his nephews knew this better, and perhaps he was not such a good brother. For a moment, William stared at the young people and listened to their conversation. Ian sighed and wondered if a good younger brother would argue with a sister who had gone through such hardships as postpartum sickness. The young lady, looking at her companion, was convinced that he was truly an extraordinary man. He had a refinement and elegance that an ordinary gentleman did not have. She saw that he had an unusual character, so she wanted to correct his hostile attitude before introducing anyone to him. Laura said with a smile that in the end he came to the event, and although he did not want this, he still kept his promise to his sister. Ian, sighing, said that they should not underestimate his sister, because there was a man in London who was keeping an eye on her. Laura, looking at the young man, said that he was embarrassed to receive praise. Ian was a little surprised by such words. He said that he never had a good reputation in his social circle. Laura said with a smile that he himself mentioned his bad reputation. She said that he was just a modest person. He was surprised and said that it was not modesty, but simply a fact. Laura said he didn't make assumptions about being a good uncle, and he attended the celebration despite the inconvenience. She smiled and said that not every man remembers that his sister suffered from postpartum illness. Laura said with a smile that the world values such people as good younger brothers. The young man froze for a moment in surprise, as he had not expected such a thing, and yet he did not answer her. William looked at us with a satisfied smile at his friend, as he saw that his companion had won. Ian stared at the young lady as she showed kindness after he had created an awkward atmosphere and tried to leave. He understood that she was not as simple as she seemed at first glance, and therefore he wanted to know who she was. Ian approached the young lady and asked her to be his friend, and then he said that he was interested in how she expressed her friendship. Laura said with a smile that her way of showing friendship was very simple, because she intended to introduce him to her friends. And even if he was far away, they could exchange letters so that he would feel that she was near. Ian, looking at his companion, declared that what she had listed were truly the most valuable things that could be obtained in friendship. The young lady, in turn, was a little embarrassed by such words. At that very moment, he noticed her embarrassment, and after a few moments, his expression changed to a sly smile. Ian extended his hand tenderly, saying that he swears on his honor as a gentleman that he will be sincere, as she wishes. He kissed her hand with tenderness and courtesy. Then he looked her intently in the eyes and said with a smile that he would count on her. She smiled and said that she was also counting on him. Laura, smiling, told the young man that they had taken their friendship one step further, so she wanted to introduce her friends to him. She asked him to dance, but he categorically stated that he did not know how to dance and had never taken dance lessons. Laura was a little puzzled as she found herself in an awkward situation. She understood that in the future he would be surrounded by many ladies, and if he only said hello and did not dance, it would be considered impolite on his part. Then a brilliant idea came to the young lady. She asked her friend if his son-in-law was well-versed in sports games. William said with a smile that his friend could quickly learn any sport after one demonstration. At that moment, the young lady grabbed the young man by the hand, and with a smile said that she would teach him to dance at a faster pace. He was shocked by this, but she asked him with a smile to go with her to the dance hall. In turn, he was puzzled. He said that he did not know how to dance, and while dancing, he could step on her foot. Laura smiled and told him that he didn't need to worry because she had strong legs, but he was very excited about this. Laura told him that he shouldn't pay attention to such thoughts, and he should just watch her slow steps and follow her. A moment later, the music started and they began a beautiful dance. They danced despite everything, and the young man did not step on her feet. Laura could see that her companion certainly had excellent coordination, and little by little he was beginning to get into the rhythm. But still, she saw that he was nervous, so she decided to cheer him up a little and make him just relax. For a few seconds, she said with a gentle smile that he could stop looking down and that he should raise his head. She asked him with a smile to look into her eyes and continue dancing together. The young man, in turn, was amazed by her words, since no one had spoken to him like this before. Laura smiled and said he could handle something like that. After a few minutes of dancing, she said with a smile that his movements already looked surprisingly natural. Then she asked him why he stubbornly avoided dance lessons despite his talent. He smiled and sighed, saying that the reason was quite simple. After all, his practice partners were only guys who sweated profusely and simply didn't want to dance. He ended up being the gentleman who didn't even dare ask her to dance, which was, of course, quite impolite. He assumed it upset her, but he still thought that this reputation was not entirely false, because he did not know how to maintain pleasant conversations, and he was still far from being a real gentleman. Laura looked at her companion with a tender smile and said that this was not so. And it seemed to her that everything was a little different. She said with a smile that if a person knows how to respect others, then he is already a gentleman. She said with a smile that during all the time spent in high society, she too had often had to deal with the feeling of heavy fatigue and discomfort. Ian was surprised and asked if ladies also faced many difficulties. She smiled and said that ladies also had their joys and happiness, as well as difficulties. Laura said with a gentle smile that it would be wonderful if someone appeared with whom she could share her happiness. They would have lived differently. She hoped that there would be someone with whom she could share long years, based on love as fate. Ian asked in surprise if she really believed that such things actually existed. She said with a smile that she believed it. He understood that she had a very romantic idea of marriage. Laura stated that she had heard similar thoughts and opinions from him. Ian said with a smile that for him, marriage loses all meaning unless it is real and not with deep love. Looking at his companion, he said that he believed in this with all his heart. A moment later, their beautiful dance ended. The young lady was surprised because in such a short time since their meeting, she felt closeness. She understood that he was a really good person, so she could easily introduce him to other ladies. At the same time, the young lady understood that he would become a great friend. A moment later, William greeted them with a joyful smile, as he saw that his friend had done an excellent job with the lesson. Laura smiled and said that with her son's skill, the young man would have no trouble dancing with other ladies. At that very moment, she was distracted by the sight of her friends, and so she asked her companion to wait a little, as she wanted to introduce them to him. William looked after the young lady with a smile and asked her not to hurry. William looked at his friend as everything had gone much better than he had expected, and at that moment he asked why he had not started studying earlier. Ian, in turn, did not answer his friend, but only watched his companion intently. He saw her beautiful and lively smile. At the same time, he could not take his gaze off her. After some time, Laura watched the fruits of her creation with a smile, as she saw that her companion was communicating well with the ladies. She noticed that the atmosphere had become a little more pleasant. At that moment, Laura turned her gaze to the young miss as she noticed that she looked especially beautiful at this event. At that very moment, she compared the young people and realized that their union would be very wonderful, because she was the flower of high society, and he was a mysterious gentleman. Laura understood that there could be nothing more perfect than this union. At that moment, she turned to her friend with a smile and said that it was time for her to go. William was a little surprised. She said with a smile that her business was already completed. He said in a hurry that he would prepare a carriage for her, but the young lady assured him that there was no need to do this, since they were already waiting for her. She walked slowly up to the carriage and stood still, looking at the beautiful hall, wondering if Ian had asked the young lady to dance. Laura looked into the distance with a satisfied smile, as she assumed that this was indeed the case. She had previously seen that the young lady was showing interest in the young man, so he simply could not remain indifferent to her. She was happy because she understood that they really were the perfect couple. Laura knew that if they got married, they would be the most magnificent couple in London. But a moment later, all thoughts flew away as the young man frightened her. Ian ran quickly up to the young lady and called her, and it was clear that he was in a hurry to follow her. Laura was shocked and didn't understand why he ran to her so quickly, so she asked if something had happened. She was shocked because she knew that he had to dance with other ladies, and then she heard from the young man that she had behaved too strictly. He sighed and wondered how she could have left without a word while he was momentarily distracted. Ian, looking at the young lady, he said that she had become his first dance partner, and then he asked if she shouldn't have at least said goodbye before leaving. The young lady froze in place in shock and embarrassment, as she did not expect such a question. Laura collected her thoughts and, with a smile, apologized for treating him like that. She said that she just thought that they would meet again soon, and so she didn't want to say goodbye to him in such an unusual way. Laura stated that their house often hosts parties for young gentlemen and ladies, as well as small musical gatherings. These meetings took place in a relaxed atmosphere, so she was going to send him an invitation. Laura smiled and said that if he was busy, of course, he could refuse. Ian asked if she really organized all the events. And Laura said with a smile that her grandmother officially organized them. But in reality, all the organizational issues fell on her due to her grandmother's health. He sighed heavily as he understood everything and said that he would drop in to see her in the near future. She said with a smile that it was good news and said that she would write to him later. At that very moment, the young man asked, "What about tomorrow?" The young lady was shocked, as she did not expect that he would want to meet so quickly. Laura said she had an appointment with the doctor tomorrow, so he might drop by after breakfast. The young man accepted her invitation with a satisfied smile and tenderly kissed her hand. She said goodbye. He smiled at her and wished her a good journey. Laura was a little surprised, as she knew he had many unexpected sides to him. She saw that he was kinder than she had expected. Laura hoped that their acquaintance would become a good and long-lasting friendship. Meanwhile, the young man stared after her without looking away. When it became known that Mr. Dalton had attended the ball, the whole of high society quickly came into motion. Everyone was literally obsessed with the idea of inviting him to their receptions. The Baron's wife asked her daughter with a smile about the previous reception. She wanted to know everything about the young and mysterious man. Dora said with a smile that the young man was much cooler and more attractive than rumors had it, and he also promised to come to them for dinner. She said with a smile that she was the only one at the event who decided to invite him. Madame, in turn, was very pleased because her daughter had chosen an excellent gentleman who would fit perfectly into their dinner. These evenings were famous throughout London. On the one hand, it all boiled down to enjoying a luxurious dinner and meeting a beautiful young lady. The main reason for his popularity was that the Baron was known for his unusual attachment to his title, and he was renowned for carefully selecting his guests. Madame knew that the young man belonged to a family and, of course, was a source of enormous profit. After all, as soon as he inherited the fortune, he began to invest in profitable mines, bonds, and shares, and soon he got going and collected a whole capital. She knew that no matter what trouble happened, he would never go bankrupt. Dora was surprised and did not know where her mother got all the information from. Sighing, she said that despite her mother always talking about money and land, she would not marry unless she felt a real attraction. And on top of everything else, she wasn't yet well acquainted with the young man. Madame was in shock. She didn't know how many times her daughter needed to meet the young man to feel attraction. She told her daughter that while she waited for real attraction, other girls would be able to drag him down the aisle. She convinced her daughter that the young man could find another girl with better conditions. So with a smile, the madam told her daughter that she was very beautiful and therefore should impress and charm him. Madame told her daughter that when he looked at her, admiration sparkled in his eyes. She knew that he simply could not take his eyes off his daughter, and this was visible from afar. But at the same time, they caught some kind of misunderstanding as he looked at his friend. At the same time, the young lady was agitated because she did not understand why he never asked her to dance. After the famous London matchmaker left, he simply said goodbye and left. The madam said with a smile that the young man had just begun to explore the world of high society, and he was not yet accustomed to dancing. The madam was sure that her daughter saw how the young man looked at her, therefore she was interesting to him, and she did not need to be upset in vain. Dora knew that she had never met a man who did not love her. She knew that he was truly kind to her, and he looked at her intently and smiled. She wondered if he was already in love with her. Dora knew it was all happening too quickly, but she was at that age when she believed everything she heard. The young lady was flying in her fantasies. Many were closely watching every step of the young and mysterious man. Several weeks passed after that ball, and the circle of social events in which he participated did not extend beyond one house. Laura greeted the young guest with a smile. Ian looked closely at the young lady and greeted her with a smile, as he was glad to see her. He visited only the young lady and no one else, although the young man really enjoyed her company. Laura noticed that it had started to rain heavily outside and asked her companion if he had gotten wet on the way. Ian reported that he was fine, but the horse had suffered along with the coachman instead of him. Laura did not know what to do with them because of the rain. He arrived. He looked at her with a smile and said that he would be able to talk to her longer. And for him, on the contrary, this was a lucky coincidence. A lot of time has passed since the young man appeared in society. Despite this, it was not easy to meet him. Many in the world began to get nervous and lose patience, but at the same time, they felt a certain relief. They understood that since he did not leave the famous London matchmaker, it meant that he had decided to find himself a bride. But at the same time, she understood that he didn't even know that she was playing the role of matchmaker. But looking at her companion, she understood that he was not at all interested in finding a bride. At the same time, the young lady did not understand what he was thinking about. To her surprise, he never missed a single tea party or dinner party at their home. She introduced him to her friends more than once, and they spent a lot of time, but he never showed interest in any lady. He might exchange a few words, but he would soon return to listen to her play. He often started light conversations with her. At the same time, she understood that he was more interested in friendship than in love. She was very pleased to be his friend, but she understood that his friend was disappointed with this outcome. After a short silence, Laura looked at the young man and said that he had said earlier that they loved London. He said with a smile that thanks to her, he had the opportunity to experience a lot and see things in a new light. While talking to the young man, she heard many stories about his native land. Whitefield. This sprawling estate, surrounded by fertile woodlands and fields, Dalton Mansion sits on a hill right in the center of the land. When he told her about his house, it seemed to her that she was standing on a hill and looking at all the beauty. It seemed to Laura that if she looked out the window, a dense forest of snow-white birches would immediately open up before her. And behind it are fields where agricultural work is in full swing. The young man's voice, as he described his homeland, conveyed a genuine warmth and affection like never before. She looked at him with admiration and listened to his stories. And at the same time, Laura noticed that he really valued his native land. Ian smiled and said that she was flattering him, but at the same time, he wondered if it wasn't like that for everyone. She said that most of the nobles didn't even know how much land they had. Laura said with a smile that the more she listened to him, the more convinced she became that his region was truly wonderful. Ian smiled and said that his home was a beautiful place. Its beauty difficult to describe in words. He said with a smile that someday she should see everything with her own eyes, but for now he could show it to her in another way. She said with a smile that it seemed like he had someone in the house who could draw. He smiled and said that if his own hands were considered part of the house, then that was true. Laura was surprised because she didn't know that he could draw. He said with a smile that he had studied drawing as a child. She was surprised, as this was unusual, since sons are not particularly taught art. Ian said with a smile that he was sorry because the weather had prevented him from taking his sketchbook with him, as he could have shown her all the beauty through his drawing, and at the same time he could introduce his nephews to her. Laura smiled as she realized that they were his sister's children. She would like to know more about everything. Ian began to talk about his eldest nephew, Henry. He was already an adult and was now studying at Cambridge, which he himself graduated from. Laura asked about the rest of his nephews, and Ian said with a smile that he had a niece, Olivia. He said that she had matured quite early and dreamed of going out into society, but that she was very sensible, so she wouldn't create any problems. He sighed and said that the real problem was the younger ones, because they were restless and their fights had become almost a daily occurrence. He sighed and said worriedly that they were just real daredevils. Laura said that was what boys that age usually did. He understood that this was exactly how it was, but their behavior was going too far, and the worst part was that he was the only one who could rein them in. She smiled and said that she was actually more interested in the younger one, who was born not long ago. Ian sighed and said that the boy was cute, but his mother had gone through pain to give birth to him. Ian said his sister always said everything was fine, but in his heart he hoped it was her last child. The young lady looked at her companion as she saw that he was very worried about her sister, so she said that she would like to give a gift for her younger nephew. She said with a smile that in order to write down the recipient's name, she needed to know the name of his nephew. She asked what his nephew's name was, but the young man looked away from her, embarrassed. A moment later, he said that his name was Ian. The young lady was surprised, but at the same time felt cute, since his sister named her son after her brother. Laura said with a smile that she would have to try hard to find a gift that little Ian would like. She looked at her companion with a smile, as she saw that he was revealing a new side each time. He could be cruel when it came to criticism, even towards things that were dear to him, but at the same time his affection was strong and tender. He had a broad view of the world, but he devoted all his love entirely to a limited circle of people. She knew that such a man would be ideal for marriage. She knew that when he felt the desire to find love, she would pray that the path would lead him to the one who would become his destiny. At the same time, the young maid watched the young people closely. She saw the gaze of the young man, who was looking intently and with admiration at her mistress. After some time, Anne looked at her mistress in surprise and asked if she was really going to leave the house. Laura said with a smile that the maid had arrived at a good time, so she asked her to help her with the finishing touches to her outfit. Anne said the lady that if she had even guessed that the lady was going to go out, she would have come a little earlier. Laura smiled and said that it was no big deal as she just wanted to go for a walk and her companion suggested they enjoy the fresh air. Anne was surprised that the young man invited her mistress. She also said about her mistress that the young man often visited their house. Laura smiled and said that he always preferred private conversations with people. This place was ideal for such meetings. At that very moment, the young maid also offered her mistress to put on the beautiful hat. Laura was sure that such an outfit would be too much for an ordinary walk. The maid was shocked and told her mistress that she would look exquisite. A moment later, Anne said of his mistress that the gentleman was visiting them for another reason. She said that he was probably delighted with the food and the chef, as everyone was delighted with their dinners. But she was also sure that the young gentleman was perhaps in love with someone who could only be met in their house. Laura looked at the maid in surprise and asked who they were talking about. The maid was taken aback and hastily said that the young gentleman was in love with her. At that very moment, the maid said that her mistress should put on a hat to look even more attractive. She insisted that the young gentleman would not take his eyes off her, but the young lady doubted that this was true. Anne was puzzled and did not understand why her mistress was so categorical. Laura said with a smile that there had never been such feelings in his gaze. She smiled and said that he was probably just enjoying the wonderful cuisine and enjoyed this kind of conversation. Anne, in turn, understood that she could not convince her mistress. But she knew that her mistress did not at all understand how the young man looked at her when she did not see anything like that. She understood that such a look could not be directed at a person who is indifferent. She was sad and angry at the same time because she saw that her mistress helped everyone in matters of love, but she herself could not deal with such things. Sometime later, the young people were leisurely strolling through the beautiful city and engaging in casual conversation. They discussed the recent joint dinner with the Morton family. Ian said that the young people complimented each other perfectly. The lady was glad that he thought the same as she did. Ian said with a smile that the young man seemed cold and taciturn, but his wife softened this atmosphere, and at the same time he looked after her with great warmth all evening. Ian said with a smile that the young lady was proud of them. Laura asked with bewilderment what he was talking about. He smiled and said that it was she who helped create such a harmonious couple. She was shocked and didn't understand how he found out about something like this. He said with a smile that the host of the evening told him everything, and if it weren't for her, they wouldn't have been able to get together. She was embarrassed and said that it was an attraction on his part. Ian told his companion with a smile that her kindness helped his friends create a harmonious family. Laura said that she had not done anything outstanding. Ian said that in their day, many people married despite the lack of mutual understanding just because of wealth and dowry. He claimed that this led to lifelong misery, but in this light, her kindness took on more significance. The young lady, in turn, was greatly embarrassed by her companion's words. Ian looked closely at his companion. He understood that she was always modest when it came to confessions. Usually in such situations, gentlemen would change the subject because they felt that the lady was in an awkward situation, but he enjoyed watching her. Laura was taken aback and asked her companion not to overpraise her because he had misunderstood her. He asked in bewilderment why she was saying that. She said that in fact the secret had made a plan at the request of his friend. In order to arrange his marriage with one of her friends, so all this time she invited him to events to introduce him to different people. She said that she was too far from this kind of wisdom. Laura understood that she told him everything, and now he would be disappointed in her. At that very moment, she glanced sideways at her companion as she wanted to hear an answer, but in response, she only saw a beautiful smile on his contented face. Laura looked at him in bewilderment as she did not understand why he did not answer. But at that very moment, she realized that he had already guessed everything. The young man, in turn, burst into wild laughter. She shouted at him not to laugh because it was too much. He asked for forgiveness with a smile because he saw that she was very sweet and therefore admired her sincerity. In turn, her face froze in embarrassment. He asked with a smile if she would forgive him, but Laura could not answer a word. Meanwhile, a young lady, walking through the city, noticed familiar silhouettes. Looking closer, she saw a young man next to Laura. She was happy because she saw Mr. Dalton. Laura timidly asked if he was offended by the fact that she was trying to matchmake him. He said with a smile that he didn't mind and, on the contrary, was grateful because she was trying to help him. Laura sighed and said that he had not planned to get married and that she had probably bothered for nothing, so she asked for forgiveness. Ian smiled and said that she didn't need to apologize because he wasn't really against marriage. He said that he also tried to find a good girl in his area, but although he was not looking for the perfect beauty, unfortunately, he was unable to find the one with whom he could open his heart. She sighed and said that she understood him. Laura looked at him with a smile and asked if he was really looking for his destiny. He said with a smile that it sounded too loud. He simply thought that somewhere out there was his soulmate, and he was sure that a meeting with this woman would happen on its own, without any deliberate effort. Sighing, he said that it turns out he believes in true destiny. Laura said with a smile that perhaps this girl was also in London, and therefore he should try to look for her more actively. At that very moment, she said with a smile that she would help him find his destiny. He smiled and thanked her for the offer, but still refused. Laura asked if he was really giving up on intentional meetings. He said that was not the case. Ian said with a smile that he no longer needed meetings dictated by circumstances. At that moment, a dead silence reigned between them, and the young man stared at his companion without looking away. Laura was momentarily stunned by his words and could not utter a word. But a moment later, the young people turned around because they heard someone's familiar voice. Miss Dora Lenz greeted the young people with a smile. Dora said with a smile that, having seen them, she decided to say hello. She asked if they had really gone out for a walk, attracted by the beautiful weather. She envied them the way she had to go out on assignment. Laura noticed that the young lady was beautiful, but her face seemed more shy than usual. Then the young lady turned to the young man with a smile. She asked him if he planned to stay in London, but he answered evasively that he would probably stay for a while. The young lady did not give up and said with a smile that if he had time, he could join the picnic. Before he could answer, the young lady asked the young miss if she would be joining them on the picnic. Laura smiled and said that if she were invited, she would certainly accept the offer. While the young man listened to their conversation very attentively, Dora asked Ian with a smile if he could attend the picnic. Without hesitation, he immediately replied that he would come. The young lady was incredibly happy. Laura looked closely at the young lady as she felt that she had behaved differently. After all, the young lady was always proud and independent, but at the same time, she actively talked with the gentleman. She suspected that the young people and the people had some kind of special relationship that she did not know about. A moment later, the young lady said goodbye to the young men with a smile. They stared after her for a while. Ian broke the silence and said with a smile that the young lady was truly charming. Laura said that she was, and she was smart as well as talented. Laura was a little excited, and she had been worried before, but now she felt and saw that the young man treated the girl well. Ian said that the only drawback in Laura's circle of friends was William. She smiled and said that he was going a bit too far, as William was a good man. She also said with a smile that he was the most important person in her circle. The young man was surprised. I didn't understand why he was so important to her. She smiled and asked if he had heard of Miss Hyde. Ian thought for a moment and asked if this was the same lady who had rejected William. Laura smiled and said that it was her. Laura immediately said that she was very glad that everything was okay now, but she was sure that it was still hard for him after the rejection. Laura reported that upon hearing that the girl was looking for a job, William offered to help by recommending her to the office where he worked. At the same time, he said that he did not want to lose their friendship. So the young lady asked her companion not to be so strict with William. She said with a smile that it was thanks to him that they met. Ian with a smile noted that this was truly a noble cause. She said they could also offer the young people the chance to enjoy a boat ride. Ian said they could use William as a coachman. After some time, they returned back to the estate, and the young lady offered to have a cup of tea. But the young man refused, as he had business. Ian sighed and said that before he left, he wanted to ask her something. Ian asked if William had ever shown any interest in her. The young lady froze in surprise for a moment, as she did not expect such a question. She asked him in bewilderment what he was talking about. She said that the young man, like his beloved, were her precious friends. She was shocked and said that even such a thought about it was unclean. The young man looked at his companion with a smile as he saw that she demonstrated clear confidence. A moment later, he looked at her with a smile and said that they would see each other next time. Laura stood frozen in a daze and looked at him in bewilderment. The young lady stared after him for a moment. She was a little confused as she didn't understand what had happened in the end. After some time, the young lady wondered what kind of relationship Ian and Dora had at the moment. She was concerned by the young man's reserved reaction, especially against the backdrop of the young lady's decisive behavior. She understood that perhaps this was Ian's way of showing true love. She knew that he hid his feelings from others, and she assumed that he would open up if they were left alone. But if this was not the case, then the young lady had misinterpreted his feelings. She knew that the young lady was certainly a wonderful and multifaceted person, but she lacked life experience and was easily susceptible to flattering words. For example, if someone admires how well they are suited to each other and encourages them to be together. Laura threw all her thoughts away, as she realized that perhaps her thoughts were too bold. She knew that the girl was a reasonable and worthy lady. After all, if there really was mutual affection between them, then her intervention would no longer be necessary in such a matter. At least in terms of conditions, this would be ideal. The young lady could not boast of a large dowry, but she had the status of the daughter of a titled nobleman. The young man, in turn, had no title, but his pedigree and the enormous fortune he possessed thanks to his family spoke for themselves. She understood that everything would go smoothly, since she was the one who introduced them, and she would watch the development of events from the sidelines. After some time, the young lady's friend came to see her. Laura greeted her friend with a smile. Jane apologized for being late, and she also said that she heard that there would be a dinner party that evening. She asked her friend if she was going to the dinner party. Laura said with a smile that she had received an invitation, but had to stay close to her grandmother. She saw that her grandmother was getting weaker every day, and she felt calmer next to her. Laura stated that she would much rather sit at home with a book or listen to the sounds of a typewriter than go to a dinner party. At the same time, Laura praised the young lady for her efforts. She saw that the girl did everything in her power, and she did an excellent job. Several months had passed since the young lady began visiting her regularly. How many months ago, when she came to her friend, she looked with delight at the beautiful office. Jane was amazed because she had never seen such a large number of books before. But moments later, her gaze was drawn to the beautiful typewriter. Laura said with a smile that the young league would soon be using it, and that with the help of this device, she could create any document. Laura said with a smile that she was passing by the closing office and bought the car secondhand. She stated that she had once been in the same position as the young lady, and not knowing how to make a living, had decided to do something similar. After much practice, she managed to learn how to quickly and accurately prepare documents. So she asked a friend for help and learned how to prepare forms for documents. The young lady was glad because she had acquired a useful skill. Now she could pass on her skills to her friend and help her in the current situation. Laura asked her friend with a smile what her impressions were when she saw something like this with her own eyes. Laura, supporting her friend, said that she would be happy to teach her how to properly use the machine. After some time, her young lady looked through the documents with delight, as her friend had achieved an excellent result in a short time. Jane, in turn, was a little puzzled and exhausted, as she had to go through a lot and put in a lot of effort. At the same time, the young lady told her friend with a smile that she had not at all expected that she would be able to instruct so firmly. Now that she saw her in a new light, Laura smiled and said that she herself had probably become carried away and began to teach with even greater zeal. But a moment later, the young lady noticed that her friend was engrossed in something. Jane asked her friend what she was writing. Laura smiled and said that she was studying Latin. Jane asked in surprise if she knew Greek. Laura smiled and said that she had studied it at a girls' school. Jane was surprised because she had heard that the school only taught German and French. Laura said that this was true, but their school had courses in Latvian and Greek. And thanks to this, with the help of a dictionary, she could translate quite successfully. Jane was amazed at what she heard, because she would not have been able to read a word. She said that if she were a man, she would definitely go to Oxford, although she cannot go there directly, but she is quite capable of helping someone. Jane asked her friend if she would like to become a private tutor. Laura smiled and said that for now she did. Jane realized that while she was practicing typing, her friend was studying hard to become a private tutor. She saw that her friend was always calm and reserved, and if anyone had seen her, they would have said that she was a real lady. But no one could have imagined that she, who seemed so calm, was in fact fighting for her future more determinedly than anyone else. Jane noticed that her friend was the best student in school. Laura knew that this was certainly true, but alas, it was not enough. Jane was surprised because she knew that every family that had a daughter would be happy to accept her. Laura smiled and said that this only happened in houses where there were daughters. But when the family faced financial difficulties, the first thing they were willing to sacrifice was their daughter's education. Jane knew that if her friend spoke several languages, she could get work in homes where there were boys. She understood that the salary there would be higher. She asked her friend if she was really going to work as a tutor all her life. Laura smiled and said that was true. She wanted to work a little, and later buy a small house outside the city. And retire from business, working hard, she assumed that she would be able to save up for a house. The young lady was delighted with her friend's thoughts, as she was already thinking about her future. She sighed and said that she had only thought about the difficulties that lay before her right now, and had not thought about what would happen next. Laura told her friend with a smile that she would cope with all difficulties. She announced that there would be a picnic soon and asked her friend if she would like to join. Jane said that she also received a message, but she did not know why she was invited. While Laura understood why her friend was invited since she insisted on it, Laura said that some of them could go together since work would never go away and there was no time left for fun. Laura realized that this picnic could be a wonderful opportunity for both of them. After all, there was nothing between them except awkwardness. She hoped that the meeting would help the young people, and they would become friends again. After some time, the young lady attended a new gathering. Young men were also present at the picnic. Dora greeted everyone present with a smile and asked the young men to take their places in the back of the truck. And she asked the ladies to move to the front of the carriage. William looked at everyone present with a smile and noticed that the hostess of the event looked dazzling. Ian looked at his friend in bewilderment and asked if he was really supposed to drive the carriage. William noticed his girlfriend in the distance and told his friend that he would drive the carriage with the young girls. He said goodbye to his old friend with a smile and wished him a good day. William walked slowly up to the ladies and, with a smile, asked them to follow him. Ian looked intently at his friend, who was tenderly courting the young lady. He was a little puzzled as he saw his friend politely offer his hand to the young lady with a gentle smile. But a moment later, he looked away as the girls called him. Dora looked at the young man with a tender smile. He agreed, but he knew it would be a good idea to strengthen his relationship with Laura's friends. He greeted the young ladies with a smile and informed them that it was time for them to leave. After some time, he brought in a carriage with ladies sitting in the back. They looked after him with embarrassment and whispered that the rumors about him were exaggerated. But at the same time, they saw that the young, beautiful lady looked very harmonious next to the young, mysterious Ian. They were sure that there was definitely something between them. But at that very moment, the lady asked the gentleman why he no longer accepted invitations to dinner parties. They said that he always refused, even if he was invited. Ian asked for forgiveness, as he had urgent matters to attend to. At the same moment, the young lady began to talk about tea at the Pendleton house, as he often visited them. For some time, the young ladies discussed these dinners while their companion, lost in thought, looked into the distance. One lady, with a smirk, wondered why they spent so much money on gourmet food, but spent nothing on their granddaughter's wedding. Dora was taken aback and asked her friend not to say such things, as these words could be offensive. Daisy said that everyone in London knew that Laura had not been given a penny for her dowry. They understood that with such an appearance, she would have long ago received recognition in society as a true aristocrat. But until now, not a single worthy man had offered her his hand. And the reason for this was the lack of a dowry. The lady did not understand why her family did not take care to provide funds. The lady turned to her friend and said that she was leaving something out. Victoria started to talk about Lady Laura's mother, but at that very moment, Dora stopped her. For a moment, there was dead silence between them. Victoria was taken aback and looked at her friend in bewilderment. At this, Dora glanced sideways at the young man. Ian apologized with a smile and announced that they had arrived at the picnic spot. He asked them with a smile to leave the carriage slowly. At the same time, he saw in the distance how his friend was tenderly courting Laura. After some time, the young people slowly approached the rest of the guests, and Dora called everyone over with a smile. She said that she had prepared peak mats for them, and she also said that if anyone wanted to go on a boat ride, they could come straight to the boats. At that very moment, the young lady noticed that her companion was looking intently in the direction where Laura was. She understood that he was still thinking about the conversation he had recently overheard. She was puzzled because she realized that her friend had raised an unnecessary topic. Ian glanced sideways at the young lady and asked if she would like to go for a walk with him. Dora was very embarrassed by their walk. She had not expected this at all, and at the same time she was very embarrassed and did not know what she should talk to him about. The young man broke the awkward silence and told his companion that he would like to ask her one question. Sighing, he asked what the young lady had meant when she spoke of Laura's mother. Dora sighed, as she knew he would ask such a question. She felt awkward talking about something like that, but the young man assured her that he valued and treasured their mutual friend. He said that, thinking about their further communication, he believed that he should know more about her. Dora sighed and looked away, saying that she had only heard about others, so she could tell some rumors. She reported that the young lady's mother was a precious daughter, a real pearl of high society. However, many years ago, she disappeared without a trace. She eloped with an American artist, who came to their house to paint her portrait, but they never got married. They simply disappeared and lived together for some time, but alas, she passed away while giving birth to her sweet daughter. The artist left the girl in the care of Lady Evagale and disappeared without a trace. Everyone decided that he abandoned his daughter for a new life. At the same time, the young lady was officially accepted into her mother's family. Dora understood that the young man was shocked by what he heard, and this was not surprising. She understood that if Laura's birth had not been marred by such a scandal, she could have shone in high society. Dora said that the young lady was noble and beneficent. Her upbringing and her origin were in no way inferior to a true aristocrat. But because of her origin, she had no dowry, and when they wanted to accept her into the family, her uncle was firmly against it. In the end, he accepted her only on one condition, that all of her mother's inheritance would go to his son. Dora asked the young man not to judge her harshly. Dora screamed that even though the lady's blood had the blood of a commoner in it, he had to see for himself what she really was. Ian said she had misunderstood him. He asked if she thought he could despise Laura over such a trifle. He sighed and said he was simply amazed. Now the young man understood why she was always reserved. Dora saw that he was not speaking directly and was hiding his true feelings. But in turn, she was puzzled and did not understand why he suddenly began to seriously think about the origins of the young lady. A moment later, the young people slowly approached the others. Dora smiled and invited her companion to play a little, but he simply wished her a good time. The young ladies looked at him in bewilderment as they thought that he would join them after all. For some time, they did not take their eyes off him while the girl asked her friend what they were talking about. The young lady happily began to tell her friends about everything. At the same time, the young man slowly returned back. He was immersed in his thoughts since he had no intention of staying in London. Besides, he wasted his time on such entertainment. At the same time, he had a lot of things to do at home. But he still wondered why. Despite the lack of any need, he still remained in London. A moment later, he realized that he had only one reason, which gave him a radiant smile. The last month has been a series of unexpected events. Ian, like a complete fool, constantly turned around her, hoping to fish out at least one word. Without asking his companion, he simply poured out his thoughts like a waterfall. It was the first time in his life that he felt what it meant to be a captive person. He was glad to see her smile, but it was she who became the object of public contempt. It was necessary to expect that the social circle was also full of small souls. Already from that conversation in the carriage, everything became clear to him. Blood, lineage, status. They enjoyed gossip, discussing other people's affairs. He was furious and wondered how the lady could survive for so long in such a place, alone and without support. He didn't know if there was anyone who could be her comfort in the cold and evil world. He wanted to become that kind of person for her. He wanted to listen to all her suffering and console her with at least something. A moment later, the young man turned around because he heard a familiar voice. At the same time, the young people were happily having fun by the lake. A moment later, a young man came up to them and corrected his friend with a smile. He noticed that Togo had an incorrect posture, and therefore he blamed the stone with interest. The young people looked at him in bewilderment. William was surprised that his friend approached them. Laura, in turn, greeted the young man with a joyful smile. She smiled and said that they were having fun, and at the same time she bet on her friend to win, and she said that he could bet on his friend to win. Ian said he would bet on the young lady too. William was puzzled. He said his friend should have supported him. The young lady smiled and told her companion that she acknowledged his skill, but that he still lacked the necessary skills. Then she asked the young man with a smile if he wanted to try himself. Ian said with a smile that he was also good at playing with stones. But when a real master challenged him, he began to worry. Laura looked at the young man with a smile and said that he should try, and in that case, she would bet on him. He smiled and said that with her support, he would try to play. William was surprised and told his friend that she had said earlier that if they played, she would always be on the girl's side. Ian looked at the young people with a smile, as he liked the fact that they were arguing among themselves in a cheerful atmosphere. Ian smiled and told his friend that if he won, it would not affect his reputation in any way. A moment later, Jane smiled and gave her opponent the first move. Ian thought for a moment, as he hadn't played something like this for a long time. He wondered if he could do it. A moment later, he threw his stone and everyone looked at him in surprise. Ian easily tossed the stone into the distance and froze in a pose looking at the stone as it slid across the water. Laura looked into the distance with delight and counted every time a stone flew away from the water. Everyone was surprised as the young man set a new record, and Jane noted that she had a strong opponent. But in turn, she looked into the distance with a grin, because she understood that she should not give in to him. The young people, in turn, joyfully rejoiced and supported their friend as they wanted her to win. Jane stood frozen for a moment, looking out at the lake, knowing she had to win and throw the stone further. A few minutes later, she threw the stone into the distance, and the young people began to count how many times it bounced off the water. A few seconds later, Laura ran up to her friend, as she had set a new record. William happily congratulated his friend and asked how she managed to achieve such a result. Moments later, Jane was telling her friend what he needed to do to achieve similar success. Ian asked his companion with a smile if they could find something else to do for entertainment. A few minutes later, the young people were sailing in a boat on the lake. Laura said that her friend suggested a similar game, and they had a fun time. Ian looked at her with a smile and said that since she said something like that, he should follow her example. Now he realized that he was really in trouble. He was puzzled and did not understand why the boat was so small. Ian was a little worried and didn't understand why everything was so quiet around him. At that moment, he looked at his companion with embarrassment, and I wondered if boat rides had always been this exciting. After a few minutes of conversation, the young man realized that he was fighting with the girl who rejected his friend's offer. He was surprised and confused and asked if they were really throwing pebbles on the water now. Laura said with a smile that they had just happened to be on a walk, and that their friend had conveniently suggested that they play with his pebbles. She was glad that they were communicating again without the slightest embarrassment, because they had always been good friends. But it sometimes seemed to her that the young man had proposed to her out of friendly affection rather than love. Ian froze for a moment but didn't answer. But after a few minutes, he asked his companion whether it was possible for spouses to find happiness if their union was born only out of friendship. She knew that this was so, but such people were few. He sighed and said that he found it difficult to understand and asked if marriage shouldn't be built on love, not friendship. She said with a smile that love sometimes gives rise to too many quarrels. And in order to live together for many years, mutual trust is more important than a stormy outburst of feelings. He was surprised because he believed that for her, there was nothing more important than love. She did not deny its importance in marriage. However, the beauty of love easily fades under the weight of the harsh realities of poverty, differences in character, and a host of other circumstances. She was sure that marriage begins with love, but ends in friendship, because passionate love always has an expiration date. He was sure that her words were wise, but he could not agree with them unconditionally. Ian believed that love was a feeling that was worth accepting, even the suffering that came with it. He understood that if spouses who are destined to live together their whole lives are deprived of passion for each other, their life together will become routine. Moreover, there were feelings after the expiration date turned out to be so great that they did not fade away until death. The young lady looked at her companion with a smile and assured him that she also believed in the power of love. She looked tenderly at her companion and said that he would undoubtedly one day find such love. Ian looked away from her. And while he hoped that everything would go as usual, he was still content to simply be near her. He felt a passionate impulse towards his companion. He wanted to touch her, and at the same time he passionately wanted to kiss her. A moment later, he was taken aback and returned to reality as he heard the voice of his companion. Laura asked excitedly if he was feeling unwell. Ian was excited, and yet he knew he needed to calm down. She was worried and said that he looked much paler than before, and at the same time she suggested that they get off the boat and rest a little. The young lady introduced her companion, and at the same time claimed that he was most likely simply overtired. He understood that her concern only worsened his condition, but the young lady, noticing a small stone, invited him to sit down. A moment later, the young man was sitting on a large stone. He understood that this situation was very dangerous, because if they continued to look at each other, he would lose his mind. Ian sighed heavily, knowing he had to pull himself together. A moment later, he shot the handkerchief and invited his young companion to sit down next to him. Laura accepted his offer with a smile and noticed that he was behaving very politely. They sat quietly for a while, looking into the distance. Laura looked at her companion with a smile and asked if this forest was similar to his domain. He smiled and said that this forest was very different. At the same time, he began to talk about his possessions. Laura was glad to hear this, but she noted that he was very lucky to be in such a place. He said with a smile that people from the provinces, on the contrary, often dreamed of London. Laura said that she was tired of the hustle and bustle and would like to enjoy the silence. He said with a smile that if it were his domain, she would be happy. Ian knew that in a place like this, she would be able to enjoy the pleasant scenery. He happily talked about his possessions and described them. He said that she could have his property and she could enjoy the scenery as much as she wanted. Laura said with a smile that hearing something like this, she could not help but admire. He said with a smile that he was speaking sincerely, and she could come to him. He stated that his estate was very quiet and his servants would be glad to have new guests. She said with a smile that she was pleased to hear such things, and that someday she would visit his lands. But at the same moment, she said with a smile that for this she would have to wait until Mr. Dalton's mistress appeared in the house. Ian was momentarily taken aback by her words, but after a few minutes of awkward silence, he asked if it was really necessary. She said with a smile that of course it was so, since she could not get into the house of a single gentleman. He said that it might take a long time to find the owner. She said with a smile that she would definitely wait for that day. After all, only in this way could she see the beautiful landscape of his possessions, but she could also see the beautiful images of the spouses. At that very moment, he said that in that case, he would need to speed up the process of finding the owner. He said that after this, he would probably be able to get the mistress to allow the young lady to remain on his property as long as she liked. Laura said that he couldn't do that to his wife because no woman would want her husband to communicate with women. He sighed and asked what if his wife wished for Laura to be everything. She sighed and said that in that case, something like that was possible, but she hadn't imagined such a situation. At that very moment, the young man said with confidence that he could imagine something like that. He said that if he really was going to get married, she would become the owner of his house. He said that without this situation, his wedding could not have taken place. The young lady, in turn, froze in place from shock because she did not expect to hear anything like this. Ian froze in embarrassment and looked intently at his companion. Before he could utter a word, the young lady suddenly stood up. She sighed and said that his future wife would no doubt object. Turning around, she said that she asked him to send this proposal to her as a friend. Ian reached out to his companion, but she abruptly pulled her hand away and said that it was time for her to go. The young man was puzzled and wondered if he had really seriously proposed with such words. After that, he realized that she did not perceive him as a man. And at the same time, he was puzzled that he was rejected. Looking at everything, he felt that he should have done something similar someday. Remaining in London, he involuntarily painted a similar picture. He wanted to propose, organize a wedding or at least an engagement, and then return with her to his domain. But such a disorderly act, of course, led to a refusal. He understood that he had to go to her and explain everything correctly. It wasn't just an impulsive act, because succumbing to the mood, he sincerely admitted that he really did love her. A moment later, the young man was taken aback, as he was informed that his recent companion had left, citing urgent matters. Dora said the young lady looked exhausted and in a hurry, so she sent the coachman to escort her. Ian was puzzled because they had an unfinished conversation. Dora was a little upset, as she realized that they would have to postpone continuing the conversation for a long time. He was shocked when he heard that the young lady could not receive guests in the house, as some distant relatives were supposed to come to visit. After some time, the young man decided to visit his girlfriend's estate, but the maid said that they were not currently accepting guests. Anne asked the young man to leave. He tried to stop her and asked her to give the letter to his mistress. She sighed and, asking for forgiveness, said that she was not allowed to accept letters from guests. He was prepared for such an outcome and therefore assumed that he would have to return. The young man, in turn, was puzzled, and he did not want to leave so easily. A moment later, he looked away to the small window where he saw the silhouette of a young lady. But a moment later, with a heavy heart, he left the estate. At the same time, the young lady stared after him. A whole week had passed since that day, and it was all driving him crazy. He continued to look for the lady every day despite the fact that he was driven away. However, each time he could not even cross the threshold and was only rejected. Besides, he had no choice but to wander around the area, not knowing what to do. He couldn't help but think that perhaps her heart would remain closed to him forever, and he wouldn't be able to rekindle the connection that once existed. A moment later, he was taken aback and threw all his thoughts away as his friend called him. William told his friend that he had received a telegram. Ian read the telegram slowly and was taken aback. After some time, he again visited his girlfriend's house, but again received a refusal. But still, he asked the maid to give something to the mistress. Anne asked for forgiveness because she could not accept the package. He said that this was an emergency because he needed to leave urgently. He said he had little time left. The maid was puzzled, but said that she could not accept the parcel as she might be fired. Ian quickly said that he would help her find a new job, or she could come to him and work on the estate, but she refused, as she did not like the countryside. He sighed as he realized he had no other choice. At the same time, the young man attached several bills to the parcel. The maid looked menacingly at the young man. A few moments later, she called him. He followed me, looked at her, and asked if the amount was not enough. She said that it was not so, and she did not ask him for money at all. She wanted him to fulfill her request. Anne looked at him menacingly and said that she would deliver the package, but he must definitely return to London. He was taken aback as he did not expect such a thing, but she declared that he must return and win the heart of her mistress. Sitting in the carriage, he again played the maid's words over in his head. He understood that if he could win her heart, he would have done something similar long ago. Meanwhile, the young lady sat quietly in her office, but a moment later she saw a maid with a bundle in her hands. The maid reported that the young man had come to them again. Laura looked menacingly at her maid, as she had said earlier that the beta had not taken anything. The maid, sighing, said that nothing could be done. She said he simply thrust the package into her hands and didn't even give her a chance to say anything. A moment later, the young lady saw a small letter. He informed her that he suddenly had to leave London. After all, sad events forced him to return to his hometown where the pastor died, and as the owner of the land, he must express his condolences. He said that as soon as things were settled, he intended to return to London because his connection with her was not over, and he could not leave the city until he restored it. He assured the young lady that he held no grudge, but he hoped that they could restore their friendship. He hoped that upon his return he would be given a chance to justify himself to her. A moment later, the young lady was taken aback as she saw something after the letter. She was surprised because she saw a beautiful picture, and I realized that he had drawn his possessions. At this, the maid looked at the young lady in surprise. She was pleased but at the same time surprised as the young gentleman was clearly revealing his intentions. Laura smiled and asked the maid to hang the painting in a prominent place in the living room. But still, the young maid was interested in what the young master wrote in the letter. She wanted to know what finally happened between them. Sometime later, late in the evening, the young lady read the letter from the young gentleman over and over again. Anne slowly entered her mistress's room and announced that she had prepared everything for washing. At the same time, she noticed that her mistress was rereading the letter. She wanted to know whether it was a declaration of love or a proposal of marriage. But looking at the lady, she realized that her expression was too gloomy for such a thing. A moment later, she was taken aback because her mistress called her and she did not hear what she was saying. Laura sighed heavily and said that the young gentleman had proposed to her. Anne was shocked by what she heard, but at the same time happy. She asked in surprise if he had really confessed his feelings. Laura said that this was not so, but his words allowed her to judge his feelings. She was shocked. She couldn't believe that her mistress was avoiding the man who proposed to her, so she asked the lady if she was planning to reject his offer. Laura sighed heavily and said that it was so, and was shocked because she knew that the young master was very wealthy. She sighed and said that she could not tell the lady what to do, but assured her that running away would not solve anything. After all, if a gentleman is free to propose, then a lady has the right to decline it. Laura said that it was not that simple, and it would be very rude of a lady like her to refuse the offer of such a gentleman. Unfortunately, she had no dowry, and although she was old enough to get married, Anne understood perfectly well that the young master knew about everything. But knowing all this, he continued to love her. She sighed and said that marriage was something completely different. After all, you can't get far on emotions alone, and for living together you need more. Anne sighed heavily, and she was heated by such words, but she could not object to the lady. Still, she asked the lady what she felt. She wanted the lady to put all thoughts aside. She asked the lady if she felt nothing for the young gentleman. Laura didn't answer and asked the maid if she knew what the greatest advantage of being an old maid was. She said that it was possible to be friends with young gentlemen without any tension. She said that there was not a drop of love in her heart for the young gentleman. The young maid was surprised and knew that this was not so. She also understood that the mistress was unwavering. A moment later, she wished her mistress good night and left. Laura took the letter and saw the impeccable polite style. Despite the cold reception, he still continued to write letters. She knew that he was a very good person, but she remembered his look after his confession. Laura was puzzled and did not know when it all started. Since she didn't look at him as a man, she believed that he would behave the same way. She knew she was not a suitable marriage partner for him. She realized that she was very lucky that he had returned to his domain now, since they would be at a distance from each other and his feelings would subside. She knew he would come back with his mind cleared and then they could be friends. But at the same time, she didn't understand why his confession threw her off balance so much. She reread his letter hundreds of times, but her heart, taught by bitter experience, whispered that she would be hurt again. She knew he desired her, and she knew that was enough. She wondered if people truly loved each other. Wasn't that enough? But watching her mother sober up, she knew that wasn't the case. At that very moment, she remembered her meeting with her grandmother. Madame Oza looked at her granddaughter with puzzlement and surprise, as she looked very much like her mother. The man looked intently at his daughter and, asking her not to cry, assured her that they were not parting forever. He said that the time would come and he would come back for her, so she should be patient for a little while. He said that she should always wear her pendant because she and her mother would always be with her. This is how the little girl remembered the farewell to her father, who left her in the Pendleton house. Separation from her beloved father left bitterness in her heart, but her kind grandmother accepted her as her own. And thanks to her, the young lady forgot about loneliness. But her happiness did not last very long. Gerald is the head of the family, and her uncle met his niece differently. For him, his niece was just a pathetic product of the scandal that had tarnished the honor of their house. And the mother's decision to accept the girl caused in him a furious anger, blazing like hellfire. As soon as he saw a young lady, he would shout and throw whatever he could get his hands on. And he also didn't shy away from giving her a slap on the back of the head. So she learned to live in the shadows, hiding like a mouse behind the baseboard. And this continued for several years, despite her grandmother's desperate attempts to protect her. Quarrels with her son forced the madam to give in to the idea of raising the girl at home and decided to send her to a boarding school. From her very first day at the boarding house, a trail of whispers about her origins followed her. But the young lady did not pay the slightest attention to them. She immersed herself in her studies, and with rare diligence and innate intelligence, she became the first student. Laura tried in every way to behave impeccably, quietly, politely, flawlessly. She slowly erased her mark as a bastard daughter. And at the same time, she became completely flawless. While she was studying, her grandmother fought to officially include her granddaughter in the family tree. But unfortunately, she had no chance against the legal head of the family. But she still went to extreme measures and promised her entire fortune to her son after her death. At that time, her granddaughter finally received the right to bear the family name. And when she graduated from the boarding school, she returned back to the estate. The old lady dreamed of her granddaughter experiencing the high life, which her mother was deprived of, and immediately introduced her granddaughter into high society. But unfortunately, London did not forget the old scandals. They did not forgive, and even more so did not accept the girl into society. She lived constantly, remembering that she was not a real aristocrat. But still, Laura learned to live with this humbly and without pretensions. She understood that even if they loved each other, her origin would sooner or later become an obstacle, and then all the suffering would fall on their children. He was very dear to her, and that is why she had to refuse his proposal. Meanwhile, the young man returned to his estate and was greeted by the butler. Ian, in turn, greeted the butler. The man asked the gentleman how the funeral went. Ian sighed and said that everything was quiet and calm. Many people came to this event because the pastor was a very kind person. Ian sighed and said that he was haunted by the fact that he couldn't be with him at the last minute. A few minutes later, the young man turned to his butler. He asked how his health was and if anything was bothering him. The man said with a smile that he was fine. Ian was glad to hear this, and at the same time, he apologized for being absent for so long. A moment later, the maid asked the butler if their master had returned, as she had not had time to greet him. At that moment, she thought for a moment, and the butler asked what she was thinking about. She said she had really hoped that their master would bring someone from London. The butler knew that until their master deigned to tell them, no one would know what really happened. Ian, in turn, was a little puzzled and devastated. He knew that several months had passed since his departure, and he had a lot to do. As he looked through the documents, he mentally began to sort them by urgency. He understood that the most important thing he needed to do was to resolve the issues of managing the estate. He knew why his butler had rushed to him immediately upon his arrival, as the manager had neglected all his affairs and was taking bribes. He didn't know where his brother-in-law had dug up such a dim-witted guy. At the same time, he did not expect much caution on the part of his brother-in-law, since his indifference to his own possessions was far from a secret. Ian had been very immersed in his work and had never left his office for a minute, but now he really felt like he was back. He couldn't believe he had spent a whole month in noisy London. He wanted to forget everything except the one single image that still lived with him. He was interested in what the young lady was doing now, and at the same time he assumed that she was currently enjoying an exquisite dinner in some noble house. Ian supposed she might have been twirling in a dance at a glittering ball, but he also wondered if she could stand at the window, gazing at the sky just like he did. Ian knew he missed her very much, and at the same time he wondered if she missed him as much as he missed her. Sighing, the young man threw all his thoughts away, as he understood that he was thinking about nonsense and that such an accurate thing could not be. He understood that everything was very strange, since she was very kind and gentle, but still she did not listen to his proposal of marriage and categorically refused him. He knew she couldn't just be disgusted by him, and she was obviously worried about the dowry and the opinions of others, but he still wondered if these were the real reasons for her refusal. He understood that he did not need money, since he was rich, and his reputation wanted to be better. He understood that her refusal was stupid. Ian wanted to try to propose to her again, and he hoped that she would listen to him. He wanted and hoped that she would listen to him calmly, attentively, and with that same sweet, serious, and insightful smile, understand. He knew that when all was said, when he again, this time for real, asked her to give him up as his wife, she would shake her head and agree. But he understood that she could listen to him and refuse. Ian was angry with himself and wished that her warm heart would not prevent her from being true to her convictions. He understood that this was all very difficult because he had convinced her and begged her. Ian knew that even if he allowed himself to have a temper tantrum, she wouldn't bat an eye. But he still had no intention of retreating, because if he missed this chance, he would never experience such a feeling. Ian knew he wouldn't go back home until he got her consent. He wanted to take her to his estate and so he knew he would do anything for her. Several days passed, but the butler noticed that his master had become somehow strange. He saw that the gentleman was increasingly immersed in sad thoughts, as if his thoughts were hovering somewhere far away. He saw that the gentleman slept poorly at night. At that very moment, the butler presented his master with documents concerning the pension for the servants. The butler saw that there were no problems with the affairs, but even such moments the master usually reviewed everything clearly and carefully. But he seemed a little distracted, and so the man wondered if something had happened in London that they didn't know about. But a moment later, the old man was taken aback as he noticed his master's drawing. Ian, looking at the butler, reported that everything was in order with the documents. After some time, the butler left his master's office, but the maids bumped into him and looked at him with bewilderment. They were surprised because they saw a smile on the butler's face. At the same time, they wondered if something had happened to lift his spirits. After some time, the young man announced that he had settled all his affairs, which meant it was time to visit his sister. Looking at his butler, he announced that he would soon be leaving for London again. He could not say how long he would be gone for, but assumed that this time he would be in London for longer. For this reason, he asked the butler to look for a trusted person to manage the name. The butler looked intently after his master. He was sure that his master was going to London because of the lady in the portrait. He saw that from that very day, as the gentleman of the true nose, he was all on pins and needles. He assumed that his master was truly in love. Therefore, this news made him happy, since he assumed that his master would soon bring his mistress to the house. Meanwhile, the young man, slowly looking around the surroundings, galloped towards his sister. A moment later, he saw birds in the distance. Sighing, he assumed the noise was due to hunting. But a moment later, he heard a painfully familiar voice. Ian hurried towards the noise, and as he did so, he saw familiar outlines. Meanwhile, the young people were arguing among themselves. But moments later, the young man heard some noise behind him. He turned around and was taken aback when he saw his uncle. Ian glared at his nephews. They were taken aback and greeted him, but he did not answer. Ian slowly walked up to his nephew and demanded from him the thing they had been playing with. The boy was taken aback and said that they were all just playing with a wooden gun, and nothing terrible had happened. Ian looked menacingly at his nephew and said that he was warning him for the last time. The boy was taken aback because he was frightened of his uncle. Meanwhile, Madame sat quietly in her room, minding her own business. But moments later, she was taken aback as her brother looked in on her unexpectedly. Margaret greeted her brother with a satisfied smile and asked when he had managed to arrive. But moments later, she was taken aback as he placed the dash on the table for her. She asked in bewilderment what kind of gun he had put there. He said he wanted to know the same thing since her sons had decided to have some fun shooting. She was taken aback, but said that her son had managed to steal the gun from his father. Ian said that he had already given them a good thrashing. Margaret smiled and said that he should look at one of the cards. He was shocked, as she was doing fortune-telling while her sons were running around with the real gun. She said with a smile that nothing had happened, so he didn't need to be angry. He was shocked, but at the same time puzzled by her behavior. For a moment, the young man sat down next to his sister, and at the same time he asked if she was still carried away by such a farce. Margaret said with a smile that it was not a farce, and she had drawn a card about his wedding at the end of the year. She wanted to know about everything that happened in London. She said that William had already told her how popular he was in London with the ladies. She also knew that he had attended a picnic, and he had never attended anything like that before. Margaret said with a smile that he should confess honestly, because at these receptions there was someone who had captured his soul. She asked if this was already the lady's sigh for whom he danced. The young man said that he had come to her in vain, and with that he began to leave. At that moment, Margaret tried to stop him, but she began to cough very violently, and her brother hurried to her. At that very moment, Margaret, with a sly smile, laughed at him in a playful manner. He was shocked by her behavior, but she quickly grabbed the collar of his clothes and asked if she was right in her judgment. Margaret said with a smile that she knew something had changed in him, and it was all thanks to the young lady. She wanted to know who Miss Pendleton was, because she assumed that the girl was very beautiful and smart. She wanted to know how old she was. Looking at her brother, Margaret demanded that he tell her everything immediately, but he continued to remain silent. Margaret asked why he had such a distant and confused look, and she suggested that he was in love, but not reciprocated. At that moment, she was taken aback and asked if it was true that he was in unrequited love. She was shocked because he had conquered all the ladies in London, but there was only one left who did not reciprocate his feelings. He said they were just friends, but Margaret didn't believe his words. She said with a smile that she could, without a twinge of conscience, convey to that young lady one very touching letter from his childhood. She asked with a smile if he had forgotten about the letter he had brought her in tears on the eve of her wedding. Then he said with tears in his eyes that even if she got married and went far away, he would always love her. She asked with a smile if he remembered writing the letter with his crooked letters and mistakes, and at the same time he smeared all the ink with his tears. He was shocked by this, but Margaret said that when she read the letter, she herself burst into tears. She said with a smile that she would give the letter to William, and he would certainly be so touched that he would give the letter to the young lady. Ian was shocked by her words, but in turn he understood that she could mock him as much as she wanted. She asked with a smile how she could mock her poor brother. After a few minutes of questioning, she asked if the girl would never accept his feelings. She wanted to know if there was any good reason. But a moment later, Margaret sighed heavily and said that he could remain only a friend to the young lady for now. She said that he should not approach too hastily because the girl should get used to his constant presence. She said that he should be calm and serene, but meanwhile, with other young ladies, he should behave a little more freely. She wanted him to pretend to be courting someone so the lady would stop being afraid of him. But when the time comes, he must act with caution. Margaret said that when the walls around her heart weakened and feelings awakened of their own accord, that was when he should act. She said that he should pretend to give his heart to another and he should ask the lady for love advice. He was shocked and didn't understand why there were such complications. She said that this jealousy would make her understand the truth. Jealousy will begin to blossom in her chest, the very one she carefully tried not to notice. Then she will fall victim to a painful languor. He sighed heavily and said that her plan was simply stupid. He did not understand how one could play with the feelings of the woman he loved. As he left, he sighed and said that he had already checked her health, so he could go. She expected such an answer from him, but Madame was surprised when he spoke about the feelings of his beloved woman. She understood that this love story would bring the new mistress to her brother's house. She really wanted to see that very lady to whom her brother had given his cold heart. Meanwhile, in London, young ladies were chatting among themselves and discussing that Mr. Dalton had left London. The young lady, in turn, simply could not believe that she was drinking tea face to face with the flower of high society. She saw that her interlocutor was graceful, calm, and noble, so she just couldn't help but admire her. In turn, Dora was puzzled when she received it from William, because she had sent Mr. Dalton an invitation. William described how his friend would unfortunately be unable to attend the event as he had left London. She was in shock and didn't understand when he managed to leave. Dora was furious because he disappeared without a word. At the same time, she assumed that William's younger sister knew the reason why he left London. The young lady thought for a moment and said that Ian had been in London for many years, and so she did not know when he would return. These were just her guesses, and she didn't know how to proceed further. Dora was puzzled, as no one knew when the young man would return to London and there was no news from him. She knew she wasn't close enough to him to send him a letter. Moments later, all her thoughts disappeared as a young man approached them and greeted them. He thanked the young lady with a smile for the invitation. She greeted him with a smile and informed him that tea was over, but that the meal would begin soon. William was happy to thank the young lady for taking such good care of his sister. Dora smiled and said that she had always dreamed of becoming closer to them, and now she was glad that they would be able to share a modest meal. William smiled and offered her his hand and invited her to go to the dining room. Dora understood that he was the only thread that connected her with Ian. She wanted to maintain a good relationship with him because she understood that she could force useful information out of him. She knew that he was, after all, a very pleasant conversationalist, and his company was not a burden to her. A moment later, she smiled and invited her friend to accompany her to the theater the following week. The young lady happily agreed. Meanwhile, Laura sat quietly in her office. A moment later, the mail was brought to her, and on one letter she saw her name and the address of the person who was her uncle. Laura saw that the letter began without the slightest decorum. Not a word of greeting, not a hint of politeness. Its content was as simple and straightforward as a mirror reflecting her uncle. There was not a drop of warmth, not a trace of goodwill in the cold tone, only a harsh stinginess of words. 6 months ago, my uncle and his second son, Charles, while in the United States, met Tom Price, my uncle's university friend. At the instigation of this gentleman, feelings flared up between Charles and his goddaughter, after which the son became engaged to the heiress from New York. And now Mr. Price himself, as reported in his letter, arrived in London allegedly to participate in the silver wedding of his younger sister. This name seemed familiar to her. Of course, this was the same gentleman who had recently caused quite a stir in society. Tom Price was an unremarkable-looking man who had been sitting there. He was unassuming but self-confident. And behind all this outward calm lurked a man whose name was already thundering in the American financial world. His business acumen, innate sense of humor, and some elusive honesty all captivated and intrigued London society. It was rumored that he was originally from England, but in his youth he went to America, where he married a dazzlingly beautiful and refined woman. And they had children, and the family lived happily for many years until death separated him from his wife. And now, more than 30 years later, he returned to his homeland, officially to celebrate his sister's anniversary. But of course, his sudden appearance has already become a source of heated gossip and inspiration for endless secular speculation. They raised the fact that he had not had his fun at various social receptions in vain, and it was obvious to everyone that he was looking for a new lady to take the empty place next to him. The appearance of the gentleman caused a real sensation, and these rumors quickly spread in London's social circles. There was not a single person who had not heard of him. In any case, the gist of the letter was that Mr. arrived in London, our ranch, then Uncle and his son should be shown the most cordial hospitality until they themselves arrived. Laura was confused, as she understood that soon her uncle would arrive in London. She understood that she had to behave calmly and not worry. After all, she was no longer that little, defenseless girl who trembled and hid from her relative, but she was still worried that she might not be able to cope with her role. She knew that he could not be angry with her as before. However, she understood that even if she came to terms with this, she was worried about what her grandmother would say about this. She understood that her grandmothers were now categorically contraindicated from worries, and she didn't want to create reasons for her anger. She intended to surround her with care so that she could calmly find peace. She was worried that her grandmother might get angry and lose consciousness because she understood that this meeting could make things much worse. Sometime later, Madame informed her granddaughter that her son and his companions had arrived in London and intended to visit their residence. The madam sighed heavily and called her granddaughter. She asked her granddaughter to prepare the best guest room. A moment later, she said that they needed to send invitations to Mr. Price, because if he was a friend of the head of the family, he deserved the warmest welcome in their home. A moment later, Madame noticed the worry on her granddaughter's face. She tenderly asked her granddaughter to come closer to her. The lady was puzzled, as she understood that her granddaughter would be receiving the very uncle who had caused her so much suffering. Laura said with a smile that everything was fine, and that she was just a little nervous. The madam tenderly asked her granddaughter to be patient for a few days for her sake. After some time, the young lady began preparations. She hastily gave orders to everyone in the house who was under her command. She slowly informed everyone where and what needed to be put. Earlier, the madam, with sadness in her voice, told her bloodleg that she had little time left, and she was unlikely to survive the current year. And before it was too late, she wanted to make peace with her son. Laura was shocked to hear this, and therefore knew that she had to do everything to ensure that her grandmother was satisfied with the result. After some time, the young lady walked around the mansion and gave everyone instructions. She knew she had to do everything to make sure the reception went smoothly. But at the same time, she understood that her grandmother should not apologize, because she became a mother to her when she was just an orphan. She tenderly told her grandmother that she would show them all how well she had raised her. At the same time, it was difficult for the young lady to do something like this. She knew she had to get everything sorted out so that everything would go perfectly, but in turn, she wondered if she could look like a completely happy lady. She knew that her grandmother was her mother, and for her happiness, she fought with her family, and at the same time, she gave her support. Laura understood that she should be happy about everything, because her grandmother sacrificed herself for her. But she knew the bitter truth that she never felt happy in this house. She was happy when she was with her father, and yet the young lady cherished every minute spent with him. From the depths of her memory, she always lived with her father, the wandering artist whose soul knew no peace. She remembered clearly all the forests through which they walked hand in hand, all the streets. She remembered clearly his face at the last moment of their meeting, and she could not blame her father for leaving her, because wandering the world and raising a daughter is a heavy burden. He, as a man, must have made the only choice that he considered possible. And yet, in moments of particular mental heaviness, she could not help but think about what would have become of her fate if they had remained together then, if only she had not acquired the knowledge that she did. Even if she didn't live in a decent environment. But she could be with him and she could live a happy life. But she also knew that now she had a grandmother, a woman who had sacrificed everything, even her own son, for her. Laura knew that her grandmother lived looking only at her, and she in turn tried to thank her as best she could. She replaced her daughter and showed her what a true lady can be. She wanted to become her pride and her consolation, and yet Laura understood that she was only half, because in high society she always had to be on guard, smiling even at those who despised her, and living not as a person but as a young miss. She wanted to know what it was like to be a simple girl, but she knew that when her grandmother left, she would not be able to live in this house. People would whisper that this was the humiliating fall of a noble lady thrown out into the street without a penny, but for her this day will become a new life, because then she will be able to live not as a young miss but as a simple girl. The closer the sad separation came, the more clearly the day approached that would be the beginning of her new life. For his sake and for the sake of her grandmother herself, she was obliged to be there in her last days. She wanted to take care of her relative, to help her reconcile with her only son, surround her with those she loves so that she can go out into the world with warmth in her heart, and only then will she be left alone and start a new life. After some time, the young lady happily met her friend, whom she had not seen for a long time. Laura thanked her friend with a smile for coming. Laura also asked her friend if she liked working for the company, since many weeks had already passed since her work. Jane said with a smile that everything was very strange, but also surprising. But so far, she was only trusted with simple tasks. A moment later, the young ladies were taken aback as they heard some noise. Tom Price greeted the young ladies with a smile. Laura greeted the man with a smile and introduced herself, and she, in turn, introduced her friend. Tom greeted them with a smile, as he had been told a lot about Laura and was very happy to meet her. At that moment, the man noticed that Jane had a very unusual style of clothing, and Laura said with a smile that her friend worked as a typist. Tom was surprised and asked the girl if she had any intentions regarding marriage. James said with a smile that she had no intentions, because she had chosen this path to avoid marriage. He looked at her with a smile and said with admiration that this was simply amazing insight. She looked at him in surprise, and at that very moment she said with surprise that he was the first who had spoken so directly. He said with a smile that she must have unraveled the very secret that not a single gentleman had dared to tell a well-bred lady. Jane asked in surprise what secret he was talking about. He said with a smile that a man is nothing more than a burden for a woman and that he cannot be anything else. He said that his late wife was most likely secretly glad that she had finally gotten rid of this yoke. Jane, in turn, noted with a smile that the man was a very funny person. Laura was very glad that her friend was next to her. That dinner party, as expected, was a brilliant success, with Tom telling how he had lived in America for over 30 years and was back in his element, but this time as a master storyteller. Everyone listened especially vividly to his stories about social life in New York, full of ironic observations and subtle wit. His voice sometimes sounded louder than etiquette required, and his chosen topics were sometimes on the edge of decency. Yet, thanks to his relaxed manner, good-natured laughter, and good-natured tone, even the boldest remarks did not cause the slightest discomfort to the guests. So, dinners with his participation were considered the most lively and successful in recent times. After some time, he smiled and praised the young lady for a truly impeccable dinner. He stated that the evening had once again given him great pleasure. He also said that she was outdoing herself every time, and that really impressed him. Laura understood that if the man was satisfied, then her uncle would have no reason to reproach her. She sighed with relief because she was a little afraid that he would be dissatisfied with something, but she saw that he was a very kind person. Sometimes she got tired of the endless series of dinners. But to be honest, in such a troubled time, this bustle distracted her from other thoughts. But much time has passed since then, and at the last dinner in honor of Mr. Price, something unusual happened. That time, the other guests left earlier than usual, and the tired Mrs. was escorted upstairs. Laura played the piano at Mr.'s request, and then they were left alone in the living room. Then Laura felt something strange, and it seemed that something had changed, and as if a wall had suddenly appeared between them. The man looked at his companion with a smile and said that when he entered London society, he heard her name. Laura asked with a smile whether he had heard her name from her uncle. He said with a smile that her uncle literally couldn't stop admiring how much of a true lady she was, the embodiment of angelic restraint and grace. The young lady was shocked that her uncle praised and admired her. She knew he hadn't visited her since she was 10 years old, but she couldn't bring herself to tell the man anything like that. At that very moment, she noticed his intense gaze on her and was taken aback. The maid rushed into the room because she heard the noise and the scream that her mistress let out. She was agitated and did not understand what was happening. At that very moment, the young maid froze in shock when she saw a truly enchanting picture. Anne wanted to know what was going on, so she screamed and asked her mistress if she was okay. Laura calmed her maid down and asked her to leave. The young maid was shocked and understood that her mistress was in an awkward position, but she quietly followed her mistress's words. The man looked at the young lady with embarrassment and asked her not to be afraid and to listen to him to the end. He said that meeting her uncle awakened something in him that had long been forgotten, namely, nostalgia for his homeland, especially later for the women of England, because there is no lady in the world equal to her in nobility, beauty, and dignity. He said that he had come in the hope that among the well-bred noble ladies they would be able to find one who would remind him of his departed wife. And one evening at the table in this house he met a lady in whom he again found the image of his late wife. He saw beauty, noble manners, intelligence, and a short temper, and he saw all this in the young lady. He said that she reflected in everything the woman he had once lost. Having collected his thoughts, he asked shyly if she would marry him. He wanted her to go to America with him, and then she would start a new life next to him. He said that her age was not an obstacle, and on the contrary, it was very good, because he was not one of those frivolous men who dreamed about young girls. He, in turn, only wanted to have a wise, virtuous wife by his side, who would warm his lonely bed and heart. He asked if she would agree to accept his proposal of marriage. The young lady, in turn, was shocked by his confession. She said that she was grateful to him, but still had to refuse because she did not feel love for him, and she did not have any hope that it would arise in the future. As she left, she asked him to accept her refusal with noble generosity. From then on, the man no longer showed up for dinner at their house, but he did not give up and, on the contrary, showed amazing, almost obsessive persistence. And from that day on, he began to send flowers to their house every day. Having learned about the young lady's schedule through inquiries, hints, and mutual acquaintances, he began to attend all the events where she was. The flowers, accompanied by polite but firm refusals, were returned, but this did not stop him, and the situation repeated itself again. In the end, the young lady was forced to give up almost all of her social life just to avoid crossing paths with him. And because of his overly intrusive behavior, the whole world quickly learned about his proposal to the young lady. Everyone in high society was whispering about the man seeking the young lady's hand, and surprisingly, most people took it as good luck for the young lady. They said that this was her last chance because next year she would be 30 years old, and now a real rich man was proposing to her. They said that she should understand for herself what position she was in, but at the same time they said that she should not try to woo other ladies, but should be glad of such a chance. They understood that the man was very kind and wealthy, and she should not miss such a chance. Although people unanimously expressed their opinions, another worry lurked deep down. After all the mothers looked at the young lady with mockery, and at the same time, they did not want something similar to happen to their daughters. Mothers unanimously told their daughters that if they didn't want to end up like best matchmaker Dana, they had to hurry up and find a husband. Thus, fear began to spread like an infection throughout all the houses with unmarried girls. And thus, without noticing it, the young lady herself became an edifying example, and at the same time, she frightened all the socialite ladies. Meanwhile, the young people were sitting over tea and discussing this very topic, since the young lady could not imagine that Miss would marry such a man of such age. Dora shared her worries about everything in society, and William was a little puzzled, since he came to the meeting instead of his sister, and heard similar things. Dora was shocked and said that the man continued to pursue her despite her refusals, and this simply frightened her, because she was sure that this was the embodiment of injustice towards Lady Laura. William understood that he was a friend of her uncle, and it was not so easy to refuse him. Dora was shocked and screamed that this was simply outrageous, since he was much older than her. But at the same time, she was glad that the young man understood her and was in solidarity with her. Dora sighed and said that if the young lady had been given a dowry, everything might have turned out differently. She did not understand how he could not show sympathy to his niece and give her money. William sighed heavily as he understood that family matters were difficult to judge, but they still understood that this was too cruel. Because if she had at least a few £1,000s of dowry, she could have married a young man of her own age, although not an aristocrat. William was in complete agreement with her thoughts, but he knew it was all sad because people were judging her based on their prejudices without really knowing her. Dora agreed with him. She understood that she could have had enough of a dowry if it weren't for the problem with her origin. And because of this, people pointed fingers at her. She said that the young lady simply could not choose her parents, but at that very moment she stopped short as the young man called her. He said with a polite smile that they were getting too deeply involved in the other man's affairs. Dora realized that she had made a mistake and immediately agreed with him. She said that she had not meant to say anything bad. He said with a smile that he understood everything and that they should leave this conversation aside. He understood that although young Laura was currently going through difficult times, she was quite capable of coping with the trials on her own. After some time, the young lady returned to her place, but she realized that she needed to be more careful. After all, she understood that the young man could send a letter to his friend, and if he wrote something bad about her, it would be bad for her. After some time, the young man, sitting in his office, realized that it was time for him to send a letter to his friend, because his friend always asked him to write about Lori. He understood that the news now was not the best, but he simply wanted to note in the letter that the Count's friend was now in London. But moments later, the butler brought him a letter from his daughter-in-law. The young man was taken aback and, shouting to his butler, took the letter back as he wanted to rewrite it. At the same time, Margaret asked with a smile how William was doing, but in fact, she was not interested in his affairs and wanted to get straight to the point. She wanted to know how he could keep it a secret that a worthy match had been found for her brother. She wanted to know who young Miss Pendleton was, who took her brother's heart. She wrote with a smile that he should take on the position of head of the London branch of the marriage committee for her sake. William was shocked. He could not understand how he had not noticed this. After all, his friend, who hated all of high society to the point of holes and trampled the threshold of the young lady's house, so he hastily wrote a letter and told the butler to send it urgently. Meanwhile, the young man received a letter from his friend and he read it carefully. Sometime later, the young man returned to London and immediately from the doorway asked the butler if William was there. He also ordered the butler to take his luggage to the guest room. The butler looked after the young man with surprise. After all, he had not heard at all that the young gentleman was returning to London again. Ian immediately entered his friend's room and angrily asked what the gentleman's name was. William froze in shock, not understanding what was happening at all. William, taken aback, hastily asked his friend if he himself had nothing to explain before asking such questions. He did not understand why his comrade had suddenly returned to London. He was worried about his possessions. Ian thanked him for his concern, but his property was in good hands after he had recommended a good manager to him. He, in turn, was impatient and sternly told his friend to answer the question immediately. He angrily asked what the name of that hackneyed upstart from America was. William was shocked, as he realized that his friend had rushed over as soon as he received the telegram. He was puzzled and scared, so he asked what his friend intended to do with such information. Ian said with fury that he intended to expel him back overseas, and preferably in such a way that he would never even think about returning. William was taken aback when he saw the gun in his friend's hands. He asked his friend in shock if he was really going to challenge the man to a duel. He shouted to his friend that this was complete madness on his part. William shouted that such barbaric antics had already become a thing of the past during his grandfather's lifetime. Ian, in turn, knew that the law still allowed such a thing. He knew that there were still seconds in the law in duels, which meant that it was possible to put a bullet in a person's head according to all the rules. William was shocked and shouted that this was not a noble duel at all. He shouted that this was most likely just a mockery of the old man. Ian, sighing, told his friend that if he did not like it, then he could simply ask the man to return immediately to America. William was shocked by everything that was happening and asked his friend to give him some time to figure it out. At that moment, he asked his friend if he was really in love with the young lady. Ian looked at his friend in bewilderment and asked why he would do something like that if he was not in love with her. He sighed heavily and said that ever since their first meeting, he couldn't get her out of his head. He said that if everything had gone according to the original plan, he would not have ended up in his possessions at all, because he wanted to marry her in London and return home with her. William was shocked that his friend had planned everything so seriously. He asked if the young lady knew about his feelings. Ian said that she knew everything, but at the same moment his friend asked if she had accepted them. The young man did not answer, and his friend assumed that she had refused. He was shocked because she had refused him, and now, after the unsuccessful matchmaking, he threatened to shoot her uncle's friend. He shouted that this was not love, but blind, reckless jealousy, and if he did something stupid, she would suffer the most. Ian asked angrily if he should just accept it. Ian said that if the young lady had a father or brother, they would have already challenged the man to a duel for the honor of their daughter or sister. Ian was beside himself with rage and shouted that some crazy old man dared to do something like that. William sighed heavily as he understood his friend's feelings. But at that very moment, he asked his friend whether he had the right to do something like that. He told his friend that he had no right whatsoever to threaten her guest with a weapon, even for the sake of her honor, and that if he decided to do such a thing, she would never want to see him again. He said that if his friend really wanted to win the heart of the young lady, then first he should calm down and think sensibly. William said that he would also think about how they should act in this situation. William asked his friend to hide the weapon because it scared him. William was shocked, and he could not have thought at all that his friend would behave in such a way in the heat of the moment. He did not expect that his friend was capable of such irrationality, although he understood that the young people could really make a worthy couple, since his friend was truly a suitable candidate for the groom, and the young lady, without a doubt, would be able to cope with his difficult character and become a faithful and good life companion for him. But William was surprised because he did not expect her to reject his proposal. Although they were very compatible, William asked his friend how he proposed to the young lady. Ian sighed and said that he did not propose. He just knew that she guessed about his feelings. William asked how exactly he expressed his feelings. After a short story, William asked if they could even hear that the girl he loved was eagerly awaiting his wedding. He still said something like that. Ian asked his friend to be silent as he regretted what he had done. Now the young man understood why the young lady had been avoiding talking about Ian lately. William told his friend that first he needed to regain her trust, become her friend again, and then maybe he would have a chance. Ian agreed with his friend's words, but in turn he was furious and did not want to make peace with the old man. He understood that if not with weapons, then in some other way he would protect her from the old man. William was a little puzzled by his friend's zeal, and then he told his friend to listen to him carefully. He told his friend that he had known the young lady for many years and had seen many swindlers try to take advantage of her vulnerability. But she was a woman without protection, without a father, without a brother, and therefore in the eyes of many she was easy prey. And it would have been much preferable if someone had tried to take her as a wife, even in the status of a second wife. He said that the young lady had never wavered, so she would be able to resolve the situation herself. Ian was furious because he understood that he simply could not sit idly by and watch everything that was happening. William told his friend that if he interfered now, it would only spoil the relationship between him and the young lady, because while they were still friends, and he could improve their relationship again, but if he made a scandal, then everything would be ruined. After something like that, she won't even say a word to him. William assured his friend that he would have no chance of marriage after such recklessness. He told his trembling friend to put his anger aside and think things through. Ian was furious because he knew that he could find that bastard, beat his face up and throw him out of England, and then take revenge on everyone who dared to insult his beloved. But he knew that this could not be done. He, unfortunately, did not want to admit it, but his friend's words were true. Because if he acted like this, she really would not want to see him anymore. Ian wanted to see her face, even if only for a moment, but he wondered if there was some subtle way to let her know he was back. A moment later, the young lady knocked on her brother's door and asked if he had time. He looked at her in bewilderment. She said that a young lady had come to visit them and she really wanted to see him. After all, Dora recently heard that he was in London. Ian looked at his little sister in bewilderment and asked who she was talking about. He didn't know which lady she was talking about now. She looked at her brother in surprise and said that they were talking about Dora Lance. Ian looked at his sister in bewilderment since he did not understand at all who they were talking about. At that very moment, he plunged into the depths of his mind as he began to remember the young lady. He realized that the name was familiar to him. After a few minutes, he remembered that it was the young lady about whom his beloved had spoken earlier. But in turn, he was puzzled and did not understand why the young lady decided to meet with him, because there was nothing remarkable in their previous conversation. And at the same time, he remembered only the lady's obsessively sweet smile. Sighing, he asked his sister to say that he was not at home, as he did not want to meet her. She was as puzzled as she had already told the girl that he was at home. Ian was puzzled and didn't see why it mattered to him. But at that very moment, he remembered something. After all, his beloved was glad that he was kind to her friend. He decided to meet her. After some time, the young lady greeted the young man with joy, as a lot of time had passed since their last meeting. She said with a smile that he seemed to have disappeared from the life of London, and she was already beginning to worry. He asked for forgiveness for being absent for so long. She asked him with a smile to sit down next to her, as she had many questions for him. William looked at his friend with a smile, as he did not think that the access would start throwing away excuses. It was a surprise for him. Ian asked his friend to be silent. Dora said that she heard that his high priest had passed away, and it must have been a hard blow for him. He sighed and thanked her for her words of sympathy. She asked with a smile whether he had settled everything after his long separation from his domain, while Dora quickly bombarded him with questions. He was taken aback for a moment, not knowing which question to answer. At the same time, the young man felt discomfort and his ears were irritated by the noise. He was puzzled because he saw that she could not remain silent for a minute. At every word, she only laughed loudly, either from stupidity or from an excess of fun. He understood that even feigned politeness was only artful to a limit, but he also understood that it was better to be secluded in a room and comfortably smoke a tobacco cigar. They continued their conversation, but the young man simply looked into the distance and occasionally nodded in agreement. She asked him everything. Ian, in turn, reluctantly answered that he sometimes read, sometimes rode horseback, and at the same time he had a boring life. At that very moment, his sister shouted with a smile that he also draws, and any artist would envy him. Dora asked in surprise if he was really that talented. He said with a smile that it wasn't so, and that his sister was just exaggerating. Janet, smiling, said that she was right, and that she had seen him throwing in the album. Ian sighed heavily and asked his sister to calm down. But Dora did not calm down and asked the young man to let her look at the drawings. Ian glanced sideways at his brother, as what he had been given was painfully unpleasant, and he wanted to leave as quickly as possible. But moments later, he sighed heavily as he did not feel the proper support from his friend and brother's response. He gave in and gave the small album of sketches to the girls. They were amazed by his talent and true skill, as they had never looked at drawings so closely before. Dora said with a smile that she saw impeccable work, and in every line one could feel subtle observation and refined craftsmanship. He sighed heavily and said that she was too kind. The young lady, in turn, looked intently at her companion and, sighing, timidly pronounced his name. After a moment, she plucked up her courage and asked if he would paint her portrait. The young man explained that he had not expected such a request. He sighed and said that he would gladly fulfill her request, but he was not a professional portrait painter, and it was unacceptable to depict a young lady alone. She said with a smile that it was only them here, and if this remains their little secret, known only to them, then nothing bad will happen. Ian was categorically against it, because a married lady or a very young debutante was still okay. But to paint a single lady already presented at court was completely impossible. He looked at the young lady intently and said that this would damage her reputation. She was very much embarrassed and shocked by his words, as she understood that he cared about her honor. But the young lady was not going to give up so easily. She said with a smile that he could draw them together. Ian knew that if that was the case, it wouldn't change the situation at all. But his friend said with a smile that he should just draw them. And even if they were together, his beloved wouldn't understand everything wrong and misunderstand. Ian sighed heavily as he realized that he simply had no choice. He wanted to be patient for a little while, because he knew that the annoying young lady was the only thread that connected him with his beloved. He understood that he would do everything and take advantage of every opportunity to achieve his goal. A moment later, he sighed heavily and asked the butler to bring everything for drawing. Dora said with a smile that when she received the portrait, she would hang it in the most prominent place in their living room, and later every guest would see what a master the young man really was. Ian sighed and looked closely at the young ladies and asked them not to move. After some time, the young lady returned back to her estate. At the same time, she looked at this portrait with joy, because she had never seen such delicate and graceful portraits before. She knew that in a world full of rich gentlemen, only Mr. Dalton possessed not only wealth, but also a truly artistic gift. Moreover, while he was drawing for her, it seemed as if his gaze was taking in every part of her beautiful soul. She was enchanted by his gaze and simply could not tear herself away from him. At this, the young lady rejoiced loudly, as she saw that this was very romantic on his part. The young lady then chose the most expensive frame in the house and hung the portrait in a prominent place in the drawing room. This portrait soon began to instill in Dora a charming, though deceptive feeling as if she were meeting face to face with Mr. Dalton every new day. Meanwhile, the young maid, looking out the window, noticed that the weather was charming, and she could go out for a short walk with her mistress. But a moment later, she noticed something. And so, in a hurry, asking for forgiveness, she shouted to her colleague that she would be leaving for a short while. Her friend was shocked as she rushed past like a whirlwind. She ran out into the street with a smile and greeted the young man, as he had been snooping around his beloved's house since dawn, and said with a smile that it was very romantic of him. Meanwhile, young Laura was looking for her maid in the house, and she was puzzled because she did not understand where she had gone. Ian sighed heavily and asked if Laura was doing well. And Vizdokaya said that there was one annoying problem, but if we talk about health, her mistress was completely healthy. Ian wondered if she was talking about the man who had come to them from America. The young maid asked in surprise if he knew Mr. Price. Ian now knew his name, but he asked the maid if she knew where he lived. She sighed and said that she knew this information, but she could not tell him about it. He asked with bewilderment why she could not do this. She sighed and said that from the expression on his face, it was not hard to guess that as soon as she told him the address, he would grab a pistol and turn the man into a sieve. She sighed and said that she wouldn't mind if someone dealt with him, but she didn't want Ian to do it. He asked, puzzled, why exactly he shouldn't do it, and asked in surprise, was it not obvious? She declared that he was the one who should marry her mistress, and she could not allow her mistress to become the wife of a murderer. The young man froze in surprise for a moment, but at that very moment a smile appeared on his face. He smiled and said that she was a faithful servant, and also asked what her name was. She told him her name with a smile, and without wasting a minute, he asked if she wanted to help him and her mistress. Anne said without hesitation that of course she wanted to help them. Ian asked if he had a chance to win young Laura's heart. She sighed and said that so far everything was going promisingly, but she was glad that at least he didn't shoot the man. He asked in surprise if she really thought her young lady would break up with him if he challenged the man to a duel. She sighed and said that she could say without the slightest doubt that Mr. Pendleton would not let this incident go unnoticed. She said that if things happened in this way, her mistress would either die at the hands of her uncle or be banished from England forever. Ian was furious. After her words, he did not hesitate to say that he would protect her from everyone, and if she threw away the despicable old man and came to him, then everything would be resolved. Anne looked at him in surprise and asked if he really thought their young lady was capable of such a thing. He sighed heavily and said that she had nothing to inherit from the family, and if her grandmother passes away, she will wander the world. Anne sighed heavily and said that there was something he didn't know. She said that her mistress had long been preparing to become a governess. The young man was taken aback and dropped his cigar after hearing this. He looked at the maid with horror and bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. She sighed heavily and said that it seemed he really didn't know anything, although this was not surprising, since her mistress rarely spoke about such things. He was shocked and shouted that this was complete nonsense. He didn't know what kind of family would take a noble lady as a servant. Anne sighed heavily and said that no one usually did that, because such ladies were considered effeminate, incompetent, and capricious. But she knew that with their mistress everything was different, because she knew Greek and Latin, and she was sure that she would be received on good terms without hesitation, because there were almost no governesses who spoke 5 languages. Ian, in turn, acknowledged that this craft suited her, because she was smart, persistent, and proud, and under favorable circumstances she could achieve independence and live with dignity. He was very much shocked and puzzled, because he understood that she could very well have left and gone to a place where he would not be able to find her. He was sad and angry because he realized that she would no longer need him. Ian knew he had to act, the sooner the better. As he left, he asked the maid not to announce his arrival. She said it wasn't difficult, but she wanted to know what he was up to. The young maid looked after him in bewilderment as he did not answer her question. After some time, she returned to the house where her mistress asked where she had been. Anne said with a smile that she was just in the shop around the corner, because she wanted to know if the very candelabra that her mistress was looking for earlier had arrived. Laura asked with bewilderment, "Didn't she see that Harry brought them yesterday?" And she asked her maid to help her with the choice of a tablecloth. But Laura walked slowly and told her maid everything they needed to do. The young maid was glad that her mistress did not notice that an uninvited guest had come to them. At the same time, she always considered that gentleman to be noble, reserved, almost ascetic. But today something else flashed in his gaze. Danger, determination, burning stubbornness. And the most disturbing thing was that this flaming gaze was directed at her mistress. But at the same time, my maid understood that this was exactly what her mistress was missing, because she was being hunted by a man who would not back down from his own. She knew that he would definitely take her mistress to his domain and give her a new name and a new life. She knew that her mistress would become the most noble lady. Meanwhile, as soon as the painting appeared in the living room of the Lenses' house and took its place on the wall, the rumor of Ian's return to London spread throughout the world with astonishing speed. Everyone started whispering that the gentleman had painted a portrait of the young lady and even given it to her as a gift. They wanted to know what had happened between them, but everyone understood that this was a real scandal. However, there was another lady in the portrait, so the rumors died down very quickly on the short journey. Of course, even with this shield, the dreamers continued to believe in romance, and later, at a tea party in the beautiful Lens house, everyone discussed only this topic. The young ladies did not skimp on words and talked about the young man all the time. They discussed the last tea party, where he looked tenderly at their friend and in sociology agreed with her. They guessed that his heart belonged to the young lady and told her that he was head over heels in love with her. At the same time, the young ladies were sure that next time he would take a step towards his beloved. The young lady looked at her friend with a contented smile and embarrassment, and suggested that next time he would propose to her friend. Dora froze in place in shock and surprise. In turn, she was embarrassed by this, and in her heart she really wanted something like this. While at the same time she understood that his return to London could not have been accidental, and he had some purpose. She assumed that she was the target. The lovely ladies told their friend that if the wedding did take place, she should invite them to be her bridesmaids. They happily said that the wedding must take place, and she must definitely invite them to her husband's estate. They were very keen to see what his estate actually looked like, given its fame. But they knew they had some strange tradition of not putting their estates on display. After all, their estate is a family nest, and in their opinion, it should not become the property of outsiders. But at that very moment, the young lady said that she had recently seen a picture of this estate. The young ladies looked at her in bewilderment and asked where she could have seen something like that. She hesitated, not knowing what to answer. But a moment later, she timidly said that the painting was hanging in the living room of the Pendleton family estate. The lady said that recently, during a social tea party at Pendleton House, one of her friends noticed a landscape that adorned the wall in the reception room, and she had never seen anything like it before. Then the young Laura replied with a smile that this painting depicted Whitefield. Dora froze in place from the silk, as she did not expect to hear anything like that. At that moment, the young ladies began to whisper among themselves, as they did not understand how in the Pendleton house there was a painting of the closed estate. Dora said with a smile that the young man had often visited that house before, and apparently he painted a portrait for them as a token of gratitude for their hospitality. The young ladies were a little surprised, as they had supposed that there had indeed been a closeness between the young people, and such a closeness that the young man, without a shred of doubt, gave them a picture of the estate, which he had never shown to anyone. They said that even Dora had never heard of this estate and had never seen anything like it. And yes, we assumed that Laura had skillfully flattered his vanity, and he had given her a beautiful painting. Now the young ladies wanted to know what was depicted in the picture, but young Dora did not hear them and was immersed in her thoughts. She didn't expect at all that the young people were so close, because she also wanted to learn about his homeland. The young lady said with a smile that they didn't need to fuss about this painting, because soon their friend would also become the mistress of those places. They happily supported their friend, as they saw that she was immersed in not very pleasant thoughts. In turn, the young lady, unable to distinguish between reality and dreams, continued to succumb to the influence of those around her, and without realizing it, lost her judgment. So, in the leisurely flow of days, the day came when Gerald and his companions arrived at the estate. Laura stood quietly near the house and watched the arriving guests. Moments later, she saw Charles. Laura was a little puzzled and looked at the young man with sadness, because he was a living portrait of her uncle in his youth. But she understood that she had to behave accordingly and not show her emotions. A moment later, she saw a young lady looking at the new house with a smile. Joan was amazed by this sight. Laura noticed that, as befitted the heiress of an American tycoon, she exuded confidence and a dazzling, almost daring charm. But at that very moment, she was taken aback and froze in a daze. Since she clearly saw her uncle, who did not show any emotion, she knew that she should not worry and should remain calm. After all, she was no longer that naive girl from the past, and he was no longer that hot-tempered young heir. She knew that now this house belonged to her, and he was just a guest. Without wasting a minute, she greeted the guests with a smile. According to all the rules of etiquette, she greeted them on behalf of the hostess of the house. Laura, with a gentle smile, informed them that while they were at the estate, she would take care of their comfort. The men in turn looked menacingly at the young lady, but did not answer her. Joan walked up to the young lady and greeted her with a smile, while she extended her hand in greeting. Laura was momentarily taken aback by this, but with a radiant smile told the young lady that she was very glad to meet him. Laura froze and, collecting her thoughts, greeted the young lady in return. But she was surprised that the girl greeted her without even waiting for the introduction. Joanne greeted the young lady with a joyful smile and said that she had been looking forward to this visit because, according to some, their house was the best in all of London. Laura said with a smile that if the young lady wished to inspect the house, she would be happy to show her everything in person. And after all, she could personally judge whether it was the best or not. Joan looked at the young lady with a satisfied smile. At that very moment, she declared that young Laura was extremely pretty. And at the same time, she asked if Laura would treat her to a cup of tea, since they were already at the estate. She said with a smile that she would also be happy to look around the reception area. Charles was shocked by this. Looking at his companion, he said that she had previously said that she would only stop by briefly to check the location of the house before meeting with Mr. Price. He said that it was time for them to go, because they were already expected. She said with a smile that it was a trifle, and her godfather would not worry if she was a little late. Charles, in turn, was taken aback and began to insist, but the young lady assured him that he did not need to behave like his uncle's servant. He was taken aback and said that it was not only because of him, because he had the right to decide what was best for her. She was shocked and did not understand who had given him such a right. She screamed that she did not remember anything like this happening. Charles said that he did not know how it was in America, but in England, the bride had to follow the will of her future husband because that was the tradition. Joan turned to the young lady and asked if such a tradition really existed. Laura was taken aback, as she did not want to be involved in something like that. But with a smile, she said that this was not entirely true. Joan shouted at her fiancé that there was no such thing, so he should let go of her hand. At that very moment, the man intervened in their conversation and said that today they really should go back, because if she was tired from the first minutes, he would not be able to look his friend in the eyes. She sighed heavily and said that since the mister insists, she will obey his words. Laura looked closely at everyone present, because even after such a humiliating reprimand in public, they both fussed helplessly. And now she was curious about the hierarchy that was being built before her eyes. Joan said goodbye to her new friend with a smile and said that they would return in the evening together with her godmother for dinner. Laura stared after them but said nothing. A moment later, she came to her senses and was taken aback, as her uncle asked if the guest rooms were ready. She looked at him intently as he looked at her with a stern and angry gaze that was filled with contempt. Laura, having gathered her courage, said with a smile that she had prepared everything and told them where the rooms were. At that moment, she announced that the servants would accompany them, but her uncle ignored her words. As he left, Charles looked after his sister with a fierce grin. Laura knew she shouldn't be thinking about such things, because now was not the time to be distracted by such people. She knew her only task was to make the dinner party flawless in the history of the house. She understood that she had to have time to prepare a place where her grandmother and uncle could have a quiet conversation before the meal began. She asked the butler to escort her uncle and companions to the guest rooms. The man was taken aback and said that they had already gone upstairs to greet the lady. Laura froze in shock, as everything was not going as she had planned. Laura, in turn, stood frozen at the door in a daze as she understood that a scandal could break out behind the door at any moment. Considering how many long years they had been fighting, it was not surprising that if they met, they would immediately start squabbling. She was afraid that her grandmother would start to worry too much. And at the same time, she was afraid that her condition might worsen. She knew that she had to prevent this from happening and not allow a quarrel to occur. Laura knocked softly on the door and announced that she was coming in. But at that very moment, the young lady froze in place. She saw her uncle kneeling, crying, and begging for forgiveness from his mother. The madam looked at her son with a tender smile and assured him that everything was fine. She said tenderly that everything was fine with her now, but he cried incessantly before her eyes. Laura was shocked and didn't understand what was going on, because her uncle had never behaved like this. At that very moment, the man with a smile introduced his son, whom the grandmother had not seen for a very long time. The madam looked at her grandson with a smile as he had matured and grown very much. Before the eyes of the young lady unfolded a picture quite unlike what she had expected. She did not see even a shadow of the scenes she was touching upon, and at the same time she understood that she should have rejoiced at such a beautiful reconciliation. But alas, for one who has never in her life imagined anything other than restrained coldness or feigned politeness. This scene of family warmth and reconciliation seemed nothing more than a strange and unnatural melodramatic performance. The madam looked at her granddaughter with a smile and asked her not to stand at the door and to come closer to them. The madam, looking at her son, declared that he had not greeted his niece, since she had been caring for her with devotion all this time. The man sighed heavily and said that it was so. He looked at his niece with a gentle smile and said that she did well. Looking at the whole picture, one could say that there had never been such quarrels and strife between them. This demonstration of an exemplary family idol made a strange impression. Laura told her family with a smile that she did what she had to. Whether it was a carefully staged scene or a genuine reconciliation, it didn't matter. After all, the only thing she wanted with all her heart was for her grandmother to remain calm. That same evening, a truly impeccable family dinner took place in the house. The focus was on the touching meeting of mother and son. The future married couple, as well as the groom's godfather, add even more coziness and warmth to the atmosphere. The main topic at the table, of course, was the newlyweds. Charles Prostanovno told how, after graduating from a prestigious university and working in a law firm, he unexpectedly chose the path of a priest. His exhaustive explanation of both the poverty and trials that were to befall them, and the power of faith and love that would help them overcome them, drew approving nods. However, the young lady remembered his cheeky manners before dinner and felt conflicted. But then she drove all thoughts away. After all, she really hoped that the guest's visit would pass without incident. After some time, she spoke about her maid, saying that the groceries would be brought in the morning, so she should inform the master. A moment later, the lady, who knew her, heard a familiar voice behind her. The man, smiling and asking for forgiveness, called the young lady. Laura was surprised that the gentleman never left. He timidly apologized for frightening her, but said that he had forgotten his gloves. The maid was furious, as she understood that he had left them on purpose, and she was beside herself with anger, as she understood that this scene could not be avoided, while Laura was more lenient towards him. The man looked intently at his companion and with a smile declared that he had a small request for the horses. Laura looked at him in surprise, as she did not understand what he was talking about. He asked her with a smile to take care of his goddaughter, and at the same time he asked the young lady to open the way for her into London high society. He said she had reigned supreme in American salons in recent years and was now aiming to conquer London. But unfortunately, she lacked the grace of English manners, and he knew that such an impeccable lady as Laura would be able to show her an example of a true English noble lady, and at the same time this would be a great support for her. Laura agreed with him and informed him that the young lady was her brother's bride, and therefore she would do her best and he should not worry. The man looked at her with a satisfied smile and thanked her for this. But at that very moment, he said that he had something for her. Laura was taken aback and screamed, asking him to stop. She screamed that she had told him to stop and that he must obey, while the maids looked on in fury at the unfolding scene. Laura was shocked and screamed that no matter how many times he offered her his hand, her answer remained the same. The man was taken aback and froze in place. He quickly changed his expression and said that it was still difficult to grasp the true meaning behind the mask of social politeness. He wanted her to at least give him a hint as to where his inadequacy lay. She looked at him in bewilderment, as she did not understand why he had changed his speech so quickly. Laura had never given him any reason for such hopes, and he behaved as if she had coquettishly lured him into her nets and was now rejecting him. Laura, having gathered her courage once again, said that her decision was immutable. He sighed and said that for today he was saying goodbye to her, but she should know that he was still waiting for her consent. As he left, he said that just one word from her and he would be hers forever, while the young lady froze in a daze as she did not expect such a thing. After some time, she returned back to her room. Because of everything that happened, she had a severe headache, and she hoped that she would reach her room without any problems. A moment later, she was taken aback and stopped as she heard her uncle's voice saying that she had been impeccable as a hostess. The young lady, in turn, froze in surprise and looked intently at her uncle. The man looked at her intently and called out to her, naming their last name. She froze, looking at him, but was unable to answer. He said with a grin that for many years she had played the role of hostess next to his mother, managing all the affairs in this house. The man couldn't resist asking why she hadn't married yet. Laura sighed and said that she had simply been unlucky in many ways. At that very moment, his face changed, and he said with a grin that a suitable groom had finally appeared. She sighed and said that it was not so, and she did not allow herself such daring thoughts. As he left, he said that whatever plans she made, she should forget about any hope of getting anything from his mother or staying in this house. He told her in a rude manner that it was time for her to find another way to feed herself. Laura stood frozen on the steps of the stairs, unable to say anything to him, and yet she knew there was truth in his words. She was furious because she knew he hadn't changed a bit, and in his eyes she was still the same, an unpleasant parasite, a pathetic mouse worthy only of contempt. But in turn, she knew that she should not show negative emotions around her grandmother and should hide all her thoughts deep inside her soul. Laura knew perfectly well that when the day came, she would renounce her family name and with joy and pride gain the new freedom of which he was so immensely proud. The next day, an unexpected guest showed up at her doorstep. Joan looked around with a joyful smile, as she did not expect to see such beauty. Laura looked at the young lady with a smile and thanked her for the wonderful compliments about the beautiful house. She was a little puzzled, as the girl had come to her without an invitation, but she knew that the young lady had come only because she wanted to look at the house. Laura realized that this was very much like the young carefree lady. The reason why Joanne Tuck was so interested in this mansion was simple. It was located in the most prestigious area of London. And in addition to money, it required an impeccable pedigree, connections, and social status. For such a purebred American as the young lady, it was simply impossible to get into this place alone. Joanne smiled and asked how many rooms there were in the house and how long all the furniture had been there. Laura was a little puzzled and didn't know what question to answer. Laura answered all of her companion's questions honestly and in detail, even though she knew that her companion would soon be the one moving into the house. She was aware of the fact that as soon as her grandmother passed away, she would simply be thrown out into the street. Joan smiled as she said she planned to go out into London society immediately after her wedding with Charles, while Laura smiled as she said it must be difficult for her to combine her duties at the parish house and her social life. Joan said with a smile that she would not go there. At that moment, Laura was taken aback as she did not expect such a thing. Joanne said with a smile that when the young man proposed to her, he promised not a parish house, but a townhouse. She said with a smile that this was precisely what had greatly influenced her agreement, since no other marriage would have given her such an advantage. Laura looked at her companion in bewilderment as she understood that this was very strange. She did not understand how her companion could rejoice carelessly, knowing that in front of her sat the one who would soon be kicked out of the house. But the young lady saw that there was no malice or superiority in her companion. Laura assumed that the girl simply did not know about the impending exile. But at that very moment, Laura wondered if the girls had really said something different. Joan looked at her companion with a smile and called her. The young lady, in turn, wanted to know where there was a good workshop. Laura asked her companion in bewilderment whether she hadn't brought the outfits from America. Joan said that she had originally prepared several trunks of clothes, but lost them along the way. She said with a smile that perhaps it was even for the best, because now she could sew clothes in London and still follow the new fashions. Laura said that there was one workshop, but it was very difficult to get in, because it was the height of the social season and the ateliers were full of orders, up to the point of being overwhelmed. The young lady was taken aback and wondered if Laura by any chance had a personal tailor, since she had a few everyday outfits and one ball gown left. Laura said with a smile that they could visit a department store where they sold ready-made clothes, high quality and very fashionable. Laura said with a smile that she would accompany the young lady and show her everything. Joan was delighted to hear this, and at the same moment she told her companion that for an American to become part of the British aristocracy was a chance that money could not buy. She said she planned to conquer London high society within a few years. She knew that with her old name this was impossible, but if she married a young man with a good reputation, she would be able to do something similar. She knew that if she became a famous figure in such a place, doors would open for her to all the social circles of Europe. She told her companions with a smile that she would immediately conquer Europe. Laura was shocked, as she saw that the girl openly spoke of marriage as a means of conquering the European aristocracy. She saw that the girl did not have the hypocrisy that socialites possessed. She had only the confidence, straightforwardness, and spirit of the times. Laura looked at her young companion with a smile, as she understood that she was a true pirate of the new century. Joan smiled and told the young lady that there were many faults in her manners. So she asked her companion to teach her British manners, and she was ready to listen to everything, since she wanted to become as noble as her companion. Laura said with a smile that she would do her best. Sometime later, the young people attended a race day. At that very moment, the young aristocrats noticed someone new next to the great matchmaker of London. Everyone was shocked, as they knew that the visiting aristocrat was in a completely different guise. Dora, without wasting a minute, approached the young ladies to greet them, and also asked Laura to introduce them to her new friend. Laura looked at everyone present with a smile and moved on to the introduction. But moments later, she froze as she saw a familiar silhouette in the distance. She was taken aback, unable to utter a word. A few moments later, she clearly saw Ian in front of her, who also kept his gaze fixed on her. For a while, the young people looked at each other intently as if no one else existed around them. Laura was shocked, as she did not expect to see the young man at this event, because she knew that he had gone to his estate. She was puzzled and did not understand how he ended up in such a place. Joan looked at her friend in surprise and asked if she was okay, as she had dropped her umbrella. Laura was taken aback as she had not noticed anything like that at all. At that moment, she collected her thoughts and joked with a smile that she was completely absent-minded. She quickly decided to introduce her friend. She, smiling, said that this was her cousin's bride, and she also mentioned her name. The young ladies happily greeted their new acquaintance and also invited her to the event. They chatted pleasantly with each other for some time. Laura noticed with a smile on her face that there was a good atmosphere between them. She was glad that her student had actually mastered social manners in such a short period of time. Laura immediately felt that the young lady was used to shining in salons and at similar events. Laura was very happy because the gracious lady had acquired the title of an influential figure in London society. She understood that now the doors of high society were open to her, and the ball would be her official debut. But at that very moment, the young lady again turned her gaze into the distance. She knew she couldn't be mistaken, and it was Mr. Dalton in front of her. She didn't understand how this could have happened, because he should have been in his own domain. She didn't understand what brought him to such a place. Dora said with a smile that she needed to step out for a few minutes, and at the same moment she called Mr. Dalton. Dora approached the young man and began to talk to him. Joanne excitedly asked if this was the young lady's cavalier, but her friend said that this was not the case and that he was just a mutual friend. She smiled and said that for now he was just a friend. Laura, without wasting a minute, asked how long the young man had been in London. The young lady thought for a moment and said that he had returned several weeks ago. She also said that Laura must have heard some rumors because recently a young man had painted a picture, which was now hanging in Dora's living room, and the young man had depicted a young lady with her sister in it. And the day she received the painting was the very day he had just arrived in London. Laura was very surprised by what she heard, but at the same moment she realized that the atmosphere between them was different. She understood that the atmosphere was no longer the same as before. Now she couldn't say that there was a feeling of love between them, but there was some kind of definite closeness. The young lady, in turn, was upset and saddened by what she heard. But at that very moment, she put all her thoughts aside as the young man greeted her with a smile. He looked at her intently and noticed that they had not seen each other for a long time. Laura met his gaze with a gentle and warm smile, and she confirmed his words. At that very moment, she introduced her future cousin with a smile. Slowly, she began to introduce the young man to her cousin, but he was a little upset by such a cold attitude on her part. The young lady greeted the young man with a smile. A moment later, someone called the young man, and he, asking for forgiveness, went off to have an important conversation. Laura watched him closely. She had expected them to meet again, but she hadn't expected it to happen so suddenly. At the same time, she was puzzled and did not understand why he did not show interest in her now. But in turn, she understood that this was even for the best, because she was afraid that his feelings would remain the same. Laura wondered for a moment if she had simply misinterpreted his attitude towards her back then. After all, in essence, he did not express himself directly that day. And after his visit to the estate, things were completely unsuccessful. She wondered if he had come to her only in an attempt to dispel her delusion. The young lady looked at her companion in surprise and asked if she was feeling well, as she was pale. Laura said with a smile that she was fine. At that very moment, she said that she would step away for a few minutes. But she turned around and noticed that her friend was talking very animatedly with a young man. She stood up slowly and said that she would get herself some water. Joanne asked with a smile if she should go with Laura, but Laura assured her that she was fine and could handle it herself. At the same time, the young man closely watched all her movements, without looking away. Laura understood that she needed to return to the table as soon as possible, but the feeling of constriction in Grudinen did not go away. She knew she had to calm down because the day he left London, she had made the right decision. She had acknowledged her feelings and promised herself to let him go forever. Laura realized that she was only confused by the fact that she saw him again. She assumed that his heart was already closed to her forever. Therefore, she wanted to pacify this feeling and give up love. Sighing, she realized that she didn't need to torment herself any longer. But a moment later, the young lady was taken aback as she heard a familiar voice. She turned around hastily, not expecting to see him. Ian looked closely at his beloved, as he noticed that she had lost weight, because now that he saw her up close, it was obvious to his eyes. He was very puzzled, and at the same time wondered if she was ill. He was furious because he dreamed of seeing her every day. And now he was forced to watch his every look and word, and all this was real torture for him. At that moment, he handed her a small flower and noticed that she had dropped it. He said with a smile that she did not need to worry, as he had not told anyone. The young lady was embarrassed by such words and thanked him for it with a gentle smile. Ian looked closely at his companion and asked if she had a few minutes to spare, as he wanted to talk to her. At that very moment, he said that he would dare to turn to her with one very important request. Laura had already given her consent, but she still didn't know what he wanted to talk to her about. She didn't know what he wanted to ask her. And then the young man broke the silence and said that they hadn't talked for a long time. He said with a smile that they were alone now, so he wanted to know how she had wished all this time. Laura smiled and said that she was fine, and she hoped that he was also in good health. Ian sighed and said that, fortunately, he was also okay. But at that very moment, he turned his gaze to the young lady and saw that she was sad. He wondered how much time had passed since he had last seen her. He enjoyed those moments of happiness because he was now next to her, whose face appeared in my memory almost every day. And yet, from the moment their eyes met, all he could do was try his best to look away from her and restrain himself. Otherwise, she would disappear again, like last time. Laura asked him with a smile how he had spent his time on his estate. He said with a smile that the days could hardly be considered pleasant, as he had been completely immersed in work, as a lot of things had accumulated. She said with a smile that since he had returned to London, it meant that he had dealt with all his affairs. Ian stated that, in general, everything was exactly like that, but at the same time he did not know why he suddenly wanted to return. He stated that his native land did not seem to him such a cozy place as before. Laura was shocked by the young man's statement. She asked why, since he said that he loved his native land more than anything in the world. He said with a smile that it was still so, but he began to feel a dead silence and loneliness there. He stated that London had changed him greatly, and that every minute he spent in the house he recalled his companion's words again and again. She looked at him in surprise, and he declared that he would like to meet his soulmate and create a harmonious union between a man and a woman. Ian looked at his companion with tenderness and warmth, and declared that it was her words that had influenced him. Sighing, he said that by talking to her, he finally understood something. He said that he needed a wife and a housekeeper. At the same time, he noted that she and only she had the power to help him with this issue. Laura was surprised because she did not understand why. Only she could help him. He said with a smile that it was Anna who should help him, since she, like no one else, knew how harsh and unsociable he was, and he also had a difficult disposition, so he sincerely asked her for help. He wanted her to teach him how to be attractive to women so that he could get married by the end of the year. Laura froze and wondered if he was pretending now. She also wondered if all this time she had been the only one attributing to him feelings that did not exist. She understood that if everything was really as it was, then she had to answer him with dignity. Laura said with a smile, looking at her companion, that she was very glad that he had changed his mind about marriage, but for her part, she would do everything possible to help him. He thanked her with a smile for her help. She smiled and said that there was no need to thank her, as she was glad that she would be able to keep the promise she had given to William. He looked at his companion with a smile and asked if she thought he had a chance of achieving what he wanted before the end of the year. Laura smiled and said that of course it was so, because he could easily conquer any lady. At the same moment, she asked why he didn't take a closer look at any lady at the ball, but at that very moment, she asked him if he already had someone in mind. He smiled and said that he had one lady who occupied all his thoughts. Ian, looking sideways at his companion, said that he was still only getting closer to her and was not sure that he could get closer. Laura wondered if he was really talking about the young lady Dora now. She smiled and said that in that case, he should ask the young lady to dance at this ball. She asked if he remembered the waltz steps she had taught him. He sighed heavily and said that of course he remembered everything, but he was afraid that his dancing skills had not improved since then. She smiled and said that he had decided to be serious in love, which meant it was time to become serious in dance too. Laura noted with a smile that nothing embellishes the beginning of love, as dancing does. He asked with bewilderment why this was so. Laura smiled and said that dancing with someone means sharing one of the most intimate, most trusting moments with a person. She said that the partners are alone, and all attention is focused on each other, on one rhythm, one step, one breath. The young man froze for a moment in surprise, as he had never looked at the dance from this angle before. Laura looked at him with a smile and said that it was very similar to marriage itself. He froze for a moment and at the same moment said that she should teach him another dance. Looking at his companion, he noticed that if she was the teacher, he wouldn't get bored with all this. Laura froze after his words. Laura knew that this was simply a sign of friendship on his part, and therefore she understood that she should not imagine anything unnecessary. At that very moment, she let him go with a smile and declared that the first dance on her list was his. She looked at him with a smile and said that he was her best friend. Ian smiled and said that she was also his dearest friend. At that very moment, he tenderly kissed her hand goodbye. A moment later, the young lady watched the young men closely, and at the same time, she noticed that they looked good together. She knew that soon he would begin a new life, the one he had always dreamed of, with the woman who was truly right for him. She knew that in front of her were the people she had met, and that they would create the most real and happy ending. After some time, the young lady returned home and found her grandmother sleeping quietly. But at the same time, she felt and saw that her grandmother had difficulty sleeping. After all, her breathing quickened each time. Laura was a little puzzled, as her uncle was with her grandmother all the time, and so she did not see her alone. A moment later, Madame opened her eyes and called her granddaughter with a smile. Without wasting a minute, Madame happily asked her granddaughter how her day was. Laura told her grandmother everything that had happened with a joyful smile. But a moment later, Madame's expression changed, and she called her granddaughter and also asked if she was having a hard time now. Laura told her grandmother with a smile that she was fine. It wasn't hard for her at all. Madame sighed because she knew that her granddaughter had always been like this, and even when pain tormented her, she would not give herself away with words or a look. Madame sighed and said that she hid everything, and no one could even know her thoughts and what surrounded her. She sighed heavily and said that this was exactly what she wanted no one to know. The madam looked at her granddaughter with a tender smile and asked her to be patient for a little while longer, because she felt that the end was already near. Laura was taken aback by her words, since she didn't want anything like that at all. Laura said about her grandmother that she is only holding on for her, so that she can be happy for the rest of her days. Laura, bursting into bitter tears, asked her grandmother not to talk about the end, just to console her, because she, like no one else, understood what such words meant. The madam sighed heavily and began to feel sorry for her granddaughter. She said that she remembers the day when she separated from her father, because then she cried inconsolably, and she could not stop crying for a long time. The madam sighed and said that now her granddaughter had become a girl, and she should no longer allow herself to shed tears. She sighed and asked her granddaughter to be patient a little longer. Madame intended to repay her for all the years of suffering. After some time, the young lady left her grandmother's room and was left alone with her thoughts. She was puzzled and, at the same time, did not know what her grandmother was already planning at the end of her long years. Moments later, the young lady was taken aback as she heard her uncle's voice asking if she had seen his mother again and was now returning. Laura sighed heavily and said that everything was exactly like that. He stated that he heard that she went with his daughter-in-law on a picnic. He asked if she had allowed herself to be impolite to her. Laura sighed heavily and told her uncle that there was nothing he should worry about. He asked in the same cold manner whether his daughter-in-law was satisfied. Laura said that everything went as well as possible, and the young lady met other ladies, and she also informed him that his daughter-in-law was even invited to several salons. He looked menacingly at his niece and said that he understood. At that very moment, the man announced that not long ago, Tom Price proposed to her. She sighed heavily and said that it was so, but he asked in a cold manner why she refused him. Laura said that it was all because she did not want to be his wife, because she did not have any feelings for him. Mr. Pendleton looked menacingly at his niece and declared that she had inherited from her mother not only her looks, but also her vanity. He said that in her position as an illegitimate child without a dowry, she could not so easily reject offers. She sighed heavily and said that he himself knew everything perfectly well, because every league has the right to refuse and be respected in its decision. Mr. Pendleton said angrily that it was not for her to remind him of his duty as a gentleman. However, as he left, he said that he would give her a little advice. He stated that pushing away suitors in order to raise her value was not the right thing to do in her position. He said that she should consider it an honor that a man had paid attention to her. So he told her that she could help him a little and still accept his offer with pride. A moment later, the young lady was left alone with her thoughts. She was furious and wondered if her words were always taken as just a petty trick, as if she wanted to increase her value. She wondered if everyone had this opinion because she had missed her best years for marriage and did not have a fortune. She understood that no matter what others said, her will could not be broken. Laura understood that she would not enter into a marriage unworthy of her, and even less so, sell herself to any man for money. After some time, the young lady met her future cousin and saw her exhausted appearance. Laura was taken aback because she didn't expect to see something like that, and so she asked her friend what happened, because she looked very tired. Joan sighed heavily and asked how she could avoid being tiresome. After all, tomorrow what awaited her was not a triumph at the ball, but the miserable fate of becoming the laughingstock of the whole world. She was puzzled. She didn't know what to do. Laura knew that the day before her friend was deeply depressed. The trouble had begun the day before, when she lived and chose an outfit for the ball. The clothes she had brought from America invited Laura to the mansion. Then she screamed with tears in her eyes and asked what she should do, because her outfits were like theatrical costumes. She was confident that these outfits would make an impression in London, and while she chose understated styles, none of the outfits were suitable for a social event. She was puzzled and realized that she should have bought several outfits at the department store, but finding a studio that would undertake the work in such a short time turned out to be impossible, and the young lady found herself in a very difficult situation. A moment later, Madame greeted Laura with a smile. Joan greeted her godfather's sister with a smile and introduced her to her friend. Madame looked at the young lady with a smile and greeted her. Nicely looked at the young lady with joy, for she was glad that a young lady of noble birth had condescended to such a humble house. She said with a smile that if the young lady had informed in advance of her arrival, she would have given the most magnificent reception. She said with a smile that there was no need for that and she was already glad to meet them. Joan sighed heavily and asked Aunt to leave her friend, as they were saddened by her outfit. Laura looked at her future cousin with a smile and asked her not to be sad about such a thing. She said with a smile that she had just been planning to lend her an outfit yesterday, so she asked the girl if she wanted to try on the gift. Moments later, they were looking with joy at the young lady, who was resplendent in a new, exquisite outfit. They spoke with delight that she had become like a different person, namely, a real London lady. Joanne asked her friend in surprise how she managed to create a creature like his. Laura said with a smile that she did nothing special, and only removed the overly lush decorations from the exquisite dress and slightly emphasized his waist. Joanne said with a smile that she really liked the outfit and was afraid that other gentlemen would start courting her after they saw her. The madam looked at the young lady with a smile and invited her to stay for dinner. Laura smiled and said that she had to refuse, as she needed to prepare for the next day. She was afraid that she might meet her boyfriend and therefore refused. But at that very moment, they attacked her and began asking her to stay for dinner, as they wanted to thank her for the gift. Laura was taken aback for a moment, feeling a little awkward about it. The young lady, in turn, still stayed for dinner. Madame, with a smile, treated the young lady to various wonderful dishes. Laura was in shock, as she understood that this meal was simply a real feast. Joanne smiled and told her friend that she usually played the role of hostess, but now she could relax a bit and let others take care of her. The reception, which she had dreaded as a burdensome duty, turned out to be surprisingly lively and pleasant. Laura, who had been exhausted by society lately, had a very good time during this leisure time. This evening became a respite for her after a series of such tense dinners, and this lasted until the miss uttered the fateful words. The madam looked closely at the young lady and asked with a smile when she would accept her brother's offer. Laura froze in shock, as she did not expect such a question. Madame said with a smile that she had been told that he had been persistently seeking her hand for a long time and that she was not entirely indifferent to his advances. Laura looked at Madame in bewilderment and asked what exactly she meant. Joan was shocked and shouted from her aunt that she had asked her to be careful in her expressions, but she was still unrestrained. Madame asked for forgiveness, but as the eldest, she had to say something like that. She was talking about the young lady, that if she intended to get married, then it would be better to do it without delay. Laura was taken aback and asked them to stop, as she understood that they had misunderstood everything. She sighed and said that the man had indeed proposed to her, but she had firmly refused. They froze in surprise for a moment and began to look at each other intently. Madame looked at the young lady with a smile and said that she understood her perfectly, and that she, of course, felt awkward. But at the same time, she declared that they were infinitely grateful to her. The lady told her friend with a smile that of course it was so, since she had brightened up the last years of her dear godfather. And if such a person as Laura were going to marry him, they would only be happy. Laura was shocked and realized it was sheer madness. No matter how convinced they were that she would marry him, she knew it was a huge mistake. Laura looked at them intently and, asking for forgiveness, said that she was sincerely sorry to spoil their hospitality, but she would like to tell them everything directly. She declared that she had not the slightest intention of marrying Mr. Price, and from the moment he proposed, she had felt nothing but extreme embarrassment. She sighed and declared that the marriage she had been avoiding all her life was exactly that kind of marriage. Without looking at her companions, she said that if they dared to speak of this matter again, she would consider it a personal insult. At that moment, she quickly stood up and announced that it was time for her to return, while she apologized for suddenly leaving them. Her friend was puzzled and asked her to stay, and also offered the crew to accompany her. But Laura refused, as she intended to get there herself. The young lady, in turn, insisted on this, as she wanted to talk to Laura alone. Laura looked at the young lady in bewilderment, but still agreed, since she had no choice. After some time, the young ladies were riding in a carriage back to the mansion, and the young lady, asking for forgiveness, said that she would like to ask Laura one question. Joan asked if she really didn't have any feelings for her godfather. Laura sighed heavily and said that she did. The young lady was taken aback, as she did not expect to hear anything like that. But at that very moment, she was taken aback and screamed, because she did not understand what they had allowed themselves to do. Laura looked at her companion in bewilderment and asked her to explain what was going on. Joan announced that her godfather intended to publicly ask for her hand in marriage at the ball tomorrow. Laura was shocked by everything that was happening. She couldn't believe what she heard. Laura stood frozen in place, stunned, not knowing what to say, but her friend now saw everything clearly. She sighed and said that her friend was not just indifferent to this marriage. She understood that it would cause her suffering, but she understood that her godfather was not the only one to blame for the current situation. Laura asked with bewilderment what she was talking about. Joan sighed and said that she knew about Laura's existence long before they met. She said that 6 months ago, Mr. Pendleton arrived in America looking for investors for his son's business, and that it was then that he met her uncle. From then on, sad, he constantly mentioned the young lady in his conversations. At first, these were harmless stories, but gradually he began to talk about a possible remarriage, and soon began to behave as if the bride had already been found. She sighed and said that at first she had doubts about such an acquaintance, complete strangers, but when Mr. Pendleton received a favorable answer from his niece to the proposal of matchmaking, she began to look at everything more positively. Joan asked her friend if she had ever sent a letter like this. Laura sighed heavily and said that she had never done anything like that. At that moment, she asked her friend if she knew why her uncle did something like that. Joan said that the man came to America on business for a Korean enterprise. She said that at first he simply asked her uncle to help him find an investor, and later he asked for direct investment. The plan of the enterprise was so chaotic that at first her uncle refused. But now the investment decision had been made, Joan asked her companion what she thought of you, what the real goal was. Looking at her friend, she said that she should find out everything directly from him. However, no matter how she thought about it, there was only one conclusion left, and it seemed that her uncle intended to sell her to the man at a higher price. Laura sighed heavily and thanked her friend for her frankness. Laura sighed heavily and thanked her new friend, because if it weren't for her, they would all have suffered great humiliation at the ball. Joan gasped and said that they still had work to do, and she would spend the night trying to dissuade her godfather. However, she sincerely asked the young lady to appear at the ball, because it would be good if her godfather had a chance to apologize to her. Now everything became clear to the young lady. Now she understood why the man behaved in this way. Laura was puzzled, because behind everything that was happening was none other than her uncle. She immediately went to him because she wanted to sort everything out. The man looked casually at his niece and asked if she hadn't been taught to knock. Laura apologized for her tactlessness, but she had come to discuss a very important matter. He said it didn't matter because he wanted to talk to her. He said that if her case was tolerable, he would start first. Without hesitation, he looked at her menacingly and said that his trembling friend would be present at the ball. He looked at her menacingly and said that they had to go to the event and she would accept his proposal of marriage. Laura looked hard at her uncle and declared that she had already given him her final answer to such a proposal. She said that if he had promised her master, that decision did not take into account her will, and she still retained the right to refuse his offer. He glared at her and asked if she had heard about this from Joan, and he angrily said that the problem was that she was too spoiled by her attractiveness. He said that she was arrogant, like her mother. He stated that she should know her place in the century. She should fall at his feet in gratitude. At the same time, he stated that he believed that she had finally realized her senseless situation and would gladly accept this offer. But instead, he saw only a vain girl who didn't believe anything about the harsh reality. Laura said that she doesn't judge herself by her appearance or any other criteria. She looked at her uncle intently and declared that she had never forgotten her lot and had never had a right to more. He did not understand why she then refused the man's proposal of marriage. Laura wondered if a woman with all her faults and weaknesses should sell herself as a thing to a man who did not love her. She looked at him with fury and asked if she was not human and did not have her own opinion. The man was taken aback for a moment and froze after her words. She said that she knew very well how much he hated her, because she was a disgrace to the family, the result of the shameful union of her parents. She said that he taught her this from her earliest years. She never allowed herself to forget this desert truth. The man looked at her with fury and shouted that he should have left her in an orphanage long ago without her mother knowing or thrown her into the stream to die there. He shouted that she was not grateful and he knew it. She said that he should not talk to her about gratitude. She screamed that she had received nothing but contempt from him. The gentleman froze in place with rage. But at that very moment, he could not bear it any longer and angrily threw a glass of alcohol at her, which shattered into pieces against the wall. He shouted furiously that she was living in luxury, and that she should seriously thank him for being the daughter of a count's family. He screamed furiously that she was just a stain on his reputation. She said that she knew because she had been repeating his words to herself all her life, but now she no longer knew what her parents' mistake was. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she had just said. He asked angrily how she dared to justify her depraved mother, who gave birth to her out of wedlock and from an inhuman man who ran away with their daughter from the family. She said that her parents were married in secret in the presence of both a priest and witnesses. She said that on the way to official registration, the mother's condition worsened and all the formalities were never completed. Laura reported that her father told her everything and how they loved each other sincerely, and their marriage had not the slightest stain before God. She said that the reason he insulted her father was not because he took her mother away or because he was an American. She said that his hostility was caused only by his poverty because he talked about honor, but in his thoughts there was always money. She knew that he never forgave her mother for the fact that she deprived him of the opportunity to sell her profitably, just as he was now trying to sell her. She screamed that it was not her father or her mother who brought shame to their glorious family, but rather his greedy, heartless nature. He looked at her with fury and declared that he was telling her for the last time that tomorrow she would accept his friend's proposal. The man was taken aback for a moment and froze after her words. She said that she knew very well how much he hated her, because she was a disgrace to the family, the result of the shameful union of her parents. She said that he taught her this from her earliest years. She never allowed herself to forget this desert truth. The man looked at her with fury and shouted that he should have left her in an orphanage long ago without her mother knowing or thrown her into the stream to die there. He shouted that she was not grateful and he knew it. She said that he should not talk to her about gratitude. She screamed that she had received nothing but contempt from him. The gentleman froze in place with rage. But at that very moment, he could not bear it any longer and angrily threw a glass of alcohol at her, which shattered into pieces against the wall. He shouted furiously that she was living in luxury, and that she should seriously thank him for being the daughter of a count's family. He screamed furiously that she was just a stain on his reputation. She said that she knew because she had been repeating his words to herself all her life, but now she no longer knew what her parents' mistake was. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she had just said. He asked angrily how she dared to justify her depraved mother, who gave birth to her out of wedlock and from an inhuman man who ran away with their daughter from the family. She said that her parents were married in secret in the presence of both a priest and witnesses. She said that on the way to official registration, the mother's condition worsened and all the formalities were never completed. Laura reported that her father told her everything and how they loved each other sincerely, and their marriage had not the slightest stain before God. She said that the reason he insulted her father was not because he took her mother away or because he was an American. She said that his hostility was caused only by his poverty because he talked about honor, but in his thoughts there was always money. She knew that he never forgave her mother for the fact that she deprived him of the opportunity to sell her profitably, just as he was now trying to sell her. She screamed that it was not her father or her mother who brought shame to their glorious family, but rather his greedy, heartless nature. He looked at her with fury and declared that he was telling her for the last time that tomorrow she would accept his friend's proposal. The man was taken aback for a moment and froze after her words. She said that she knew very well how much he hated her, because she was a disgrace to the family, the result of the shameful union of her parents. She said that he taught her this from her earliest years. She never allowed herself to forget this desert truth. The man looked at her with fury and shouted that he should have left her in an orphanage long ago without her mother knowing or thrown her into the stream to die there. He shouted that she was not grateful and he knew it. She said that he should not talk to her about gratitude. She screamed that she had received nothing but contempt from him. The gentleman froze in place with rage. But at that very moment, he could not bear it any longer and angrily threw a glass of alcohol at her, which shattered into pieces against the wall. He shouted furiously that she was living in luxury, and that she should seriously thank him for being the daughter of a count's family. He screamed furiously that she was just a stain on his reputation. She said that she knew because she had been repeating his words to herself all her life, but now she no longer knew what her parents' mistake was. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she had just said. He asked angrily how she dared to justify her depraved mother, who gave birth to her out of wedlock and from an inhuman man who ran away with their daughter from the family. She said that her parents were married in secret in the presence of both a priest and witnesses. She said that on the way to official registration, the mother's condition worsened and all the formalities were never completed. Laura reported that her father told her everything and how they loved each other sincerely, and their marriage had not the slightest stain before God. She said that the reason he insulted her father was not because he took her mother away or because he was an American. She said that his hostility was caused only by his poverty because he talked about honor, but in his thoughts there was always money. She knew that he never forgave her mother for the fact that she deprived him of the opportunity to sell her profitably, just as he was now trying to sell her. She screamed that it was not her father or her mother who brought shame to their glorious family, but rather his greedy, heartless nature. He looked at her with fury and declared that he was telling her for the last time that tomorrow she would accept his friend's proposal. The man was taken aback for a moment and froze after her words. She said that she knew very well how much he hated her, because she was a disgrace to the family, the result of the shameful union of her parents. She said that he taught her this from her earliest years. She never allowed herself to forget this desert truth. The man looked at her with fury and shouted that he should have left her in an orphanage long ago without her mother knowing or thrown her into the stream to die there. He shouted that she was not grateful and he knew it. She said that he should not talk to her about gratitude. She screamed that she had received nothing but contempt from him. The gentleman froze in place with rage. But at that very moment, he could not bear it any longer and angrily threw a glass of alcohol at her, which shattered into pieces against the wall. He shouted furiously that she was living in luxury, and that she should seriously thank him for being the daughter of a count's family. He screamed furiously that she was just a stain on his reputation. She said that she knew because she had been repeating his words to herself all her life, but now she no longer knew what her parents' mistake was. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she had just said. He asked angrily how she dared to justify her depraved mother, who gave birth to her out of wedlock and from an inhuman man who ran away with their daughter from the family. She said that her parents were married in secret in the presence of both a priest and witnesses. She said that on the way to official registration, the mother's condition worsened and all the formalities were never completed. Laura reported that her father told her everything and how they loved each other sincerely, and their marriage had not the slightest stain before God. She said that the reason he insulted her father was not because he took her mother away or because he was an American. She said that his hostility was caused only by his poverty because he talked about honor, but in his thoughts there was always money. She knew that he never forgave her mother for the fact that she deprived him of the opportunity to sell her profitably, just as he was now trying to sell her. She screamed that it was not her father or her mother who brought shame to their glorious family, but rather his greedy, heartless nature. He looked at her with fury and declared that he was telling her for the last time that tomorrow she would accept his friend's proposal. The man was taken aback for a moment and froze after her words. She said that she knew very well how much he hated her, because she was a disgrace to the family, the result of the shameful union of her parents. She said that he taught her this from her earliest years. She never allowed herself to forget this desert truth. The man looked at her with fury and shouted that he should have left her in an orphanage long ago without her mother knowing or thrown her into the stream to die there. He shouted that she was not grateful and he knew it. She said that he should not talk to her about gratitude. She screamed that she had received nothing but contempt from him. The gentleman froze in place with rage. But at that very moment, he could not bear it any longer and angrily threw a glass of alcohol at her, which shattered into pieces against the wall. He shouted furiously that she was living in luxury, and that she should seriously thank him for being the daughter of a count's family. He screamed furiously that she was just a stain on his reputation. She said that she knew because she had been repeating his words to herself all her life, but now she no longer knew what her parents' mistake was. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she had just said. He asked angrily how she dared to justify her depraved mother, who gave birth to her out of wedlock and from an inhuman man who ran away with their daughter from the family. She said that her parents were married in secret in the presence of both a priest and witnesses. She said that on the way to official registration, the mother's condition worsened and all the formalities were never completed. Laura reported that her father told her everything and how they loved each other sincerely, and their marriage had not the slightest stain before God. She said that the reason he insulted her father was not because he took her mother away or because he was an American. She said that his hostility was caused only by his poverty because he talked about honor, but in his thoughts there was always money. She knew that he never forgave her mother for the fact that she deprived him of the opportunity to sell her profitably, just as he was now trying to sell her. She screamed that it was not her father or her mother who brought shame to their glorious family, but rather his greedy, heartless nature. He looked at her with fury and declared that he was telling her for the last time that tomorrow she would accept his friend's proposal. The man was taken aback for a moment and froze after her words. She said that she knew very well how much he hated her, because she was a disgrace to the family, the result of the shameful union of her parents. She said that he taught her this from her earliest years. She never allowed herself to forget this desert truth. The man looked at her with fury and shouted that he should have left her in an orphanage long ago without her mother knowing or thrown her into the stream to die there. He shouted that she was not grateful and he knew it. She said that he should not talk to her about gratitude. She screamed that she had received nothing but contempt from him. The gentleman froze in place with rage. But at that very moment, he could not bear it any longer and angrily threw a glass of alcohol at her, which shattered into pieces against the wall. He shouted furiously that she was living in luxury and that she should seriously thank him for being the daughter of a count's family. He screamed furiously that she was just a stain on his reputation. She said that she knew because she had been repeating his words to herself all her life, but now she no longer knew what her parents' mistake was. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she had just said. He asked angrily how she dared to justify her depraved mother, who gave birth to her out of wedlock and from an inhuman man who ran away with their daughter from the family. She said that her parents were married in secret in the presence of both a priest and witnesses. She said that on the way to official registration, the mother's condition worsened and all the formalities were never completed. Laura reported that her father told her everything and how they loved each other sincerely, and their marriage had not the slightest stain before God. She said that the reason he insulted her father was not because he took her mother away or because he was an American. She said that his hostility was caused only by his poverty because he talked about honor, but in his thoughts there was always money. She knew that he never forgave her mother for the fact that she deprived him of the opportunity to sell her profitably, just as he was now trying to sell her. She screamed that it was not her father or her mother who brought shame to their glorious family, but rather his greedy, heartless nature. He looked at her with fury and declared that he was telling her for the last time that tomorrow she would accept his friend's proposal.